You can see it on YouTube as of 7 p.m. on the Friday of the week for that lecture. So that is a backup. And of course, it's also very valuable for you to use to study from. Anyway, welcome to Art 2.1. And this will be a class where we're going to cover, it's almost an impossible task. I tell all my classes this. We're going to cover over 15,000 years of art history, from prehistoric cave paintings to Gothic cathedrals, not counting the 2 exams, in 16 weeks, 16 classes. So it's a lot to cover, but I, of course, compensate to the degree that I've been teaching, by the way, at the JC, mostly in person. This is my 3rd semester, as it is for many other instructors, of Zoom instructions. And I've gotten at least competent at it. I can say that. I prefer in person, but the reality being what it is, we understand why we have to continue on Zoom for most classes. I do have one in-person class, and the odds are slim, but if any of you miss a class and you want to catch the lecture in a setting where you can ask questions, you do have to wear a mask. That class just got its quota. You just got over 20. And that's half capacity, and everyone's gonna be wearing a mask, and I'm fully vaccinated. I don't know, that's your business if you are or aren't, but there'll be ventilation in the room and plenty of hand sanitizers and all the safety precautions that we need to have. So I'll be teaching that on Wednesday nights. And if you miss the Monday version of the class, that's an option. You can, as a student in my other section, it's fine if you want to catch that one. And that gives you a chance to ask questions, make comments, or discuss, concern or, whatever problem you might have with a paper or something in person at the break or before class. I usually get there about 20 minutes or 15 anyway. Okay, let me let in these other people and then we will have forum. I was beginning to worry. Can I ask, did anybody have trouble logging in? I know some people do, because I like I said, I forgot to hit the enable link thing that's on the little box. I don't know if any of you have conducted or hosted Zoom meetings with your friends, but it has a drop down box. I always do it first and then forward the email info about the Zoom ID number. So I did it in reverse this time. I just want to know if that didn't cause a problem. I hope people, okay, good. Looks like we have reasonable quorum, but we have actually, a spelling error.
There was an extra 6 in the ID. But
now that is my fault, and thank you for pointing that out. I guess my mind subconsciously, if I can make a corny observation, might have said, oh, we can't have too many 6s in a row. You know what that means, John? It's the first time I've had a number with 666, but I guess I put 4 6s is what you say. Okay. All right. I don't normally have that issue. I've had it maybe twice in a year before this semester, 2 semesters in a row. I think it happened once in a class in each semester where I somehow copied the number wrong. I apologize. Mea culpa. Okay. I don't think that'll happen too often, especially now that you guys have pointed it out. All right. Here we go. Let me do this. I would like to make sure, if you don't have these in front of you, a few people contacted me as late as an hour before class started, and I had to break away to get ready. I had a quick bite to eat and all kinds of other things before setting up for tonight's class. So I didn't respond to you if it was within the last hour. And some people before that were saying they didn't know how to download or weren't sure what for the 3 forms that you need tonight, and each week after this there will be an email reminding you what forms you should have. But every class you should always have in front of you the syllabus, because we're going to get to that tonight, right? Which we'll go over a bit before we take a break, and then after that we'll go over the first 4 slides together, and we may end a little early tonight. It's hard to say. But I don't want to rush through the first half, which is answering all your questions and explaining what the course is about, what we're going to cover, how we're going to do it, and how the grading is done. That's a really important first task. But the other form you should have, besides the syllabus, or 2 forms, I'm sorry, and we'll start with the first one, is the grading policies form, right? Course grading policies and requirements. I sent these to everybody, right, as attachments, and you do have to have the PDF function on your computer. Obviously, that's not my rule, that's the JC's requirement, because it's the most universally openable, supposedly, of all the formats. And then the third one, every class you should have these in front of you. is the list of terms to know. We only get to like the first two tonight. We don't do more than 3 or 4 in any one lecture. And I will dictate the definitions for those terms too. You'll see how it works right after the break when we get to the first slide. Okay, so if you don't have that, do one of two things. Please first go check your student portal, because it's probably sitting there, because that's supposedly everyone has that access as a PDF attached, as 3 actually separate PDF attachments. If you still can't locate it or download it, then you can send me an email and I will forward it to you directly. But I hope not to have to do that with a third of all my students. That's very time consuming. Okay, and how do you email me? It's on the top of the syllabus. But if you don't have the syllabus for tonight, for whatever reason, my email address for all future assignments and all extra credit is markw@aol.com. I know that's old school. Who has AOL? Well, I can tell you it's a lot less cumbersome than Outlook. But obviously, if you contact me on Outlook, I'll get to it eventually. But I don't know if other instructors of yours have told you, it's very cumbersome. And it's hard to navigate. At very least, AOL is easier to navigate, and I have a good spam filter. So it doesn't filter out, so far it hasn't, any of my students' papers, but it does filter out all the junk mail. But Outlook, we get lots of junk every day. Invitations to a graduation ceremony or something I had nothing to do with, a high school reunion that I never even attended, that kind of crap keeps coming through. So I don't want to wade through all that. I much rather focus on important things like your emails. So again, the email to contact for future use for any work you're submitting, or questions if you want a quick answer. If you send a question to me on Outlook, I will answer, but it might take a couple of days. But I usually get back in 24 hours. With this email, one more time, it's pretty straightforward, 5 letters, my first name and last initial, Mark, MARKW @AOL.com. Okay. So we got that out of the way. Let's see, is anybody else still needing to be admitted? No. Since we only have 18 participants, I'm afraid that's what's the problem, is that I resent the invitation though, but I imagine some people didn't see that about 4 or 5 minutes before class started. I'm going to normally start about 2 or 3 minutes after the normal start time. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. So let's do this. I'm going to do a speaker review, because now what I want to do is, well, first I have to get that on here, is have your undivided attention for you all to be able to see the text I'm going to be referring to. So you should already have next to your laptop, right, each evening, each class, those handouts. So starting with the first one we're going to go over together is the grading and course policies. I think some of you already know this. I'm going to go ahead and I think it's hide the thumbnail. There we go. Okay, I'm coming to you from my bedroom in Berkeley, but in case you're curious. And if the lighting is a bit weird and I look like a ghost or something, it's one of those things where I have no control over that, because staging is not my forte. But at least hopefully you can hear me, right? And you can see me. I can hear all of you. Oh, first thought, I don't mute my students. I don't think that's a way, at least I don't feel, that teaching is more effective if I can hear from my students at a point during any lecture, or even before, right after, let's say not before, but after, before the break. In other words, we'll take a 15-minute break each evening. And at the end, I stick around for 10, 15 minutes, sometimes longer, to answer all your questions. But during the class, you can, this, most of you, you can either send me a chat question, but I won't see it right away. And if it's more urgent, as long as it's relevant and succinct, so it doesn't, take too much time, I'll encourage that and answer it right away in real time if I hear your question. Looks like there are 2 chats. Let me just check and see if either of them have to do with... Yeah, I figured that out after someone pointed out. It's not a spell, it's a numerical error, I think, which I deeply apologize for. So if there are, it looks like something on the order of a third of the class that didn't get to log in because of that, they will be able to see the entire lecture. Hopefully they check back again before they give up, but whatever, that's my fault. On Zoom at 7 p.m. a couple people just joined us, right? Every lecture will be posted on Zoom, every Zoom lecture on Friday of that week. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I figured. Yeah, so I probably just need to get a magnifying glass because those numbers on my screen, about your laptop, are very tiny, but that's no excuse. Okay, once more, let's move on to what we need to start with. Our first task is to clarify what the course is about. Well, it's about all the great works of art from, quote, Western culture. Well, what does that mean? It's various interpretations have been given, but I can summarize for the course, this course, and it's with the type of works of art that we're going to see with the slide, files that I have, A and B, the textbook covers. It's going to include ancient, prehistoric, sorry, first prehistoric, then ancient, and then medieval art. We stop at the beginning of the Renaissance, right? Well, roughly about 1500. So that's what I meant by over 15,000 years. The first work of art is the cave painting. We're going to see it, I believe, next week. Yeah, when we get to prehistoric art. And it's over 17,000 years old, or something close to that, 15,000 BC or BCE. So that's the temporal or time frame scope of the class. Geographically, it will cover what most people call the Middle East, North Africa. So it's not just Europe and North America. And of course, Europe and artists in North America after about what? There aren't going to be too many. Well, no, we're not. That's what I'm going to say. Yes, yes. I almost forgot. See, I've taught 2 classes a day. I'm going to be teaching 3 a day starting Wednesday. Take a breath. Take a breath. Here we go. Yes, we're talking about the indigenous cultures in North America in a very minimal way, though, because we don't have time to do it in a world art class. I teach world art. I love teaching that. We do. But I am going to give you something that you've never seen in any other class. I guarantee it. Unless you've taken a class on Bay Area indigenous cultures and their history. Maybe you have. And if you have, it probably was a Marin city of, or sorry, College of Marin, right in Marin County, where there's an excellent instructor who wrote a book called. Her name is Betty Gerke. She's an archaeology instructor, but she gives both history and archaeology classes about the history of the used to be called pre-Columbian or indigenous cultures. So I wrote an article for Marin Magazine. What does that have to do with anything that concerns you? We're going to cover a unit for the first time. I've never had it before because I didn't have the information, let alone the slides. I do now because I just finished a feature article for Marin Magazine, and when it's published, you can get extra credit by forwarding me, a copy either digitally or a hard copy. You'll get double credit. I'll explain extra credit options in a couple minutes, but I hope you'd read it first. It was very enlightening, and I would say even fascinating is probably the right word, to learn more about those cultures. I knew who the Miwok culture were. I took California history at UC Berkeley, but that's so long ago, they weren't emphasizing that. Obviously, much more emphasis has been put on indigenous cultures recently. So I think it's appropriate to have a unit about that. And even though there's only a few slides, you'll see all of the slides I took that turned out well of the sites that you could then go to for extra credit and take photos of. We'll explain all this when we get to the extra credit part in a few minutes on the course grading sheet. So, I think you'll learn some things you wouldn't otherwise in a traditional Western art history. But yes, we are focused mostly on Western art because that's the nature of the class and that's the scope of it. Okay, so let's now, as they say, segue to the, here it is. So now you can see it better if you didn't have a copy in front of you, right? You should definitely by by the end of this week, so you can look ahead. And if you hear it tonight, though, you will know by the end of this first half what to expect to do, what are the tasks, what are the requirements, and how to get a good grade. Starting with the texts, okay, there are two in this class. That was my afternoon class. At 3. You guys only have 2, and it's volume 1. That's all you need. Don't buy both. I don't think most of you would, but unless you're planning to take a later art history course, it covers periods after 1500. Then you might want to, but anyways, volume 1 for this class of Marilyn Stockstead's art history. Well, I'm very aware of, got to slow down, how outrageously expensive textbooks are, from A, being a student, and B, now for over 24 4 years now. I've been teaching at the JC. I hate that, but there are ways around that. If you didn't already know, I'll keep it brief because most of you probably do. You can, of course, find used copies almost, I don't know, different sites you can find them on. Hey, welcome. Here we go. Yeah, we're just starting with the requirements, the textbooks for the class. So with Stockstead, if you bought it new, even just one volume, it's like $200 or something outrageous price. I hope no one ever has to spend that much, unless you can be an art history major or teacher. Maybe then you want that hard copy, with whatever. But you could buy a loose leaf edition. That's a little less, and of course, used copies, or you can rent it. I don't know if they're still doing that with Stockstead, but they were last semester. My readers told me that. I didn't know that. And that's a lot less expensive, of course. So used copies are a good way to go, or sharing maybe even. Okay. The second textbook is Sarah Gill, who was the one who asked me to interview for this job 25 years ago. She lives in Berkeley. She's a friend, a mentor, goddaughter to my daughter, who just turned 18 and is taking an art history class at the JC online. Not this one. And that is Sarah Gill's The Critic Sees. And it's a paperback, and again, outrageously expensive if you bought it directly from the bookstore, because they get it from the publisher. Obviously, it shouldn't be too hard, I hope, to find used copies kicking around. But if not, you do want to have that book. It'll help you all with writing your papers. So let's segue to that now. There are 4 components to the grade system in this class. Each one is equally weighted. I don't know if any of you took any 4-year university classes like, I did at UC Berkeley. I got my BA there in history. They used to say that and 50 cents will get you right on BART. Now that and $5 might get you right on BART. The few people that are writing BART these days. Anyway, that wasn't, I couldn't work with, I ended up becoming a shoe salesman. Yeah, at Penny's department store to survive. Wasn't going to get hired anywhere. I didn't even have a teaching credential. So I went back, got a teaching credential and a master's degree, which is what I have that qualifies me to teach this class at Cal State. It was at Hayward. It's Cal State East Bay. Okay, so for what it's worth, I didn't like the fact that instructors would make the final worth a third of the grade, some of them even more. So if you had one bad test day, you blew your whole, even if you were earning A's up until that point. I structured the class a much more flexible way. So you can recover from one bad test day. I don't recommend you, take it easy when it's time to study or take the test, of course, but it's possible to not get a good grade on one of these 4 elements because they're all equally weighted. But the papers, you really shouldn't have a problem getting at least a B, or if you follow the instructions. And I will give you detailed descriptions with a sample of an A paper. You'll get it as a JPEG that you can download and just read on your own. And we'll go over it together in class. You'll be very clear what the requirements are for the paper. And they're short papers. There are 2 of them, one before the midterm and one before the final. And they're each worth 100 points, as are the final and the midterm. And the final is not cumulative. I hope that is somewhat relief to some of you, because I hated finals. We had to go back to the first week of class and study the notes from 18 weeks ago or something. Okay. Also, they're open book. I think I said that. I know I did in my emails to everybody. If you saw those, open book meaning open note and open book. It's pretty obvious. There isn't much other choice with an online class, but I'm also making that reasonable accommodation for anyone taking my in-person classes, because that's only fair. It wouldn't be fair to have one section out of the 3 I teach that has to do all closed book. So if you go to a 4-year university, I don't know if any of you are at Sonoma State, but some of my readers are now. One's at Sonoma State, one's at Sac State, and they said they're in-person classes. They're not open book, the tests, but that's upper division, of course, and those people aren't, some of them already in graduate school, of course. But for the JC and any course, as long as we're having this COVID sets of restrictions and mostly Zoom instruction, it's only fair, I think. So you won't have to worry about not being able to look at your notes, and you'll have extra time until midnight of that day. The test will be given in real time, and then the video will be posted. Actually, it's 48 hours. Yeah, so you'll have until the end of that week. So actually, for some of people that took my Monday night section, obviously you have even longer. The point is you'll have at least 2 full days after the video of the exam is posted, and then I'll take it down, of course, of both the midterm and the final. So you've got plenty of time to A, prepare, B, look at your notes, and C, write your answers for the two exams. They are 1 hour exams, but you'll have an hour and a half in class. And then in this class, because it's a 3 hour class, we will, after the break that night, after the midterm, not the final, that's all we do on final exam week. But for the midterm, we will go on to some new slides after that. Okay, I hope that's a bit of a reassurance to some of you about, the grading system. Oh, it's not graded on a curve. My classes never have been, and none of the classes I ever took it. And any of the college level classes were on a curve. I don't think any of them. I know some instructors do, but I don't. However, if you're taking it credit, non-credit, just for the units, you just need 70%, which would be like a C minus, right, of the total points possible. So that would be 280 points because 400 is the maximum possible. Okay, I don't take attendance in a Zoom class. I do in the in-person classes for a couple of reasons. I understand with Zoom, people don't always, stick with the full first lecture or second, or maybe they join late. I've already had emails to say, well, I'm out of town until the next week. So just to avoid that, plus taking all the time to call people's names out, mispronouncing half of them, I ask you to do something much more interesting and I think enlightening, and that is write a mini bio. I will repeat this right before the break, so you can use the break to do it, or you can wait until tomorrow. I just need them by Friday evening, but sooner is better. And all it is 3 facts about yourself. That's why it's called mini bio, meaning half a page is plenty. You should, maybe a little more, but not a full page. You don't need to write that much. What 3 things do I ask you to write about? So I get to know you, and log you in as officially enrolled in the class. That's how I double up taking roll with introductory information on each of you, which is number 1 thing to write about in your, I calling them mini bios, just for lack of another term. First would be your educational and work experiences. Not every job you ever held if you had a dozen, but the most important ones, and what level of education you've attained, and maybe what you plan if you just got out of high school. I know some of you have your goals for that. So educational experiences, and plan, just briefly summarize, and your most important work experiences. That's the first thing. Okay. Second would be where have you lived and traveled outside the Bay Area? Okay, that's pretty straightforward. And then the third thing is, what do you want to learn from this class about the art we cover? So for that one, you don't want to ask, I'd like to know about Picasso or Van Gogh. We don't cover that. We end that period long before that. There's, of course, those are from the last 2 centuries. So anything up until the end of Gothic or medieval art, up until 1500, would qualify as something that I could emphasize a little more or less. If I see half a dozen students are really interested, and I can guess one subject that more of you will be interested in than most likely any other, and that's ancient Egypt, which fascinates me because I went there once in my life for 3 weeks, and it's never left my consciousness. That is a very intense culture, as you all know, if you've heard anything about all of the recent finds. They keep finding new, burial sites, and even not new pyramids; those are above ground, but crypts, right, and monuments and statues and mummies. But the ones they already have that I saw when I was there, I will show you my own slides. So in other words, this class is not just from the text and the syllabus and just a slide lecture, take notes, and then, over and over that, nothing else. This class will occasionally, at least like probably every other week or so on average, several times in the semester, we'll pause in the whole note-taking lecture aspect. And I will show you slides of the places that are related to that week's topic, such as my trips to ancient Egypt, Istanbul, incredible city. I don't know, very few students have ever been there all these years of teaching, but if you ever go, you'll see why I say that. It's a remarkable city. The crossroads of 2 continents, the only city in the world that's on 2 continents. In the city limits, it spans 2 continents, Europe and Asia. And it has, almost 2,000 years of history, all preserved. You can see it right in the street. So we'll see slides from Istanbul, Turkey, And then also Greece, ancient Greek sites all over, not just Athens, of course, Athens, but also some of the temples outside the big cities that are still partially standing and where the Greek gods supposedly lived. And then Rome and other parts of Italy, in and around the city of Rome when we get to Roman art. And then finally, Gothic cathedrals. I've been inside probably 24, but we'll see at least the major ones, a couple of them, I should say, up close. Especially Notre Dame, the one that almost burned down, right? But luckily was saved at the last minute, and they're restoring it. So if you go to Paris now, you can't go inside, except you'll see my slides of what it looks like, or what it did and will again, right? So this class will have some more just general interest things where you don't have to take any notes, and we'll do that several times throughout this semester. Okay, let me talk about extra credit, and then I'll pause to let you guys ask any questions you have before we segue into, my background as an instructor, what qualifies me to teach this briefly. Like, since I'm asking you to do that, I'll give you like a thumbnail overview of some of the aspects that I will bring in terms of my background, in terms of, I can say that term. There we go. The word "in terms of" is really overused in academia, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. In the context, there we go, of what this course can emphasize that other maybe similar classes might not, because each teacher obviously brings set of different life experiences and expertise and knowledge. So my area is strongest in architectural history. So you'll see how that relates when I do a little more of my own background comments, but mostly as we go through the course. Okay. All right, so I don't take attendance. My office hours are at the end of each class. I stick around as long as there are questions. Usually that's only 15 or 20 minutes. And then anytime by appointment. I don't want to do more Zoom than I already get Zoom headaches as it is from doing 4 different Zoom lectures a week. But I will get back to you quickly with answers to your questions. If you email me or if you want to talk to me, you can call. My voicemail is on your handouts that I just mentioned. It's at the top of the course policy handout that we're going over right now, and it's at the top of the syllabus. And that is a personal, confidential, 24-hour voicemail. So if at 3 in the morning you're panicking about something before your papers due, I won't hear the message till the next day. But when I get it, I'll get back to you if you give me a number and a time to call, or email, of course. And those I check. Mark W. again. That's the fastest. If you send me questions to the campus email, that's okay too. I will get them, but it might take a little longer. So let's admit this other person. Okay, we were just, you didn't miss too much, but we were just talking about the grading policies handout that you should have with you. And we're going to now wrap up here with the extra credit. The good news with extra credit, at least I hope for many of you, is that you can raise your letter grade 1 whole grade by doing the extra credit options, or maxing. I call it maxing out. You can get up to 50 points extra credit. Actually, if you do the math, that's more grade, because 40 points would be, right, if 90%, I mean, it's obvious, right? But if it isn't, anything above 90%, meaning 360 points or more, gives you an A. So what if you bomb a test and you do okay on your papers, and it's okay, so C, whatever, on your final, but you bomb the midterm? I don't know, it's possible, even with open book exams. How do you recover? Extra credit. That could raise you back up to an A if you did enough options to get 50 points. So let's go over the options quickly now, and then I'll stop and take any questions you have. Okay, the first one is going to any art museum. Well, I can tell you one right now that I'm going to with a friend on Sunday. It's the Immersive Van Gogh exhibit. Now, it doesn't have to be an exhibit about something we're covering. Did anybody go to the Did anybody go to the Pompeii exhibit? That was at the Legion of Honor this spring and summer. It was really good. It was actual artifacts from the buried city of Pompeii, including a stone remnant of a body of someone who died suffocated to death. You know that. Pompeii, we'll talk about Pompeii. I've been there. They weren't buried under lava. That's Hollywood, right? Or I don't know what, some old movies and TV shows, maybe. I don't think the modern History Channel stuff would get it that wrong. They were asphyxiated, that's the phrase, by a poisonous gas, and they died, suffocating. in their homes or in the streets. Then ash came over them and covered their bodies, and then the lava made a hard core over that. So their bodies totally evaporated. Of course, 2,000 years, they're not going to be anything left, not even bones, well, maybe a little bit of bones. So that left a cavity of the shape of their bodies at the moment they died, including their pets. It's really almost tragically moving to see that. In Pompeii, you see that. What happened? The archaeologists 200 and some years ago started finding this. That's when it was rediscovered, back in the 1700s. And ever since, when they stumble on an air pocket that was once a dead body, they pump it full of plaster. And then when the plaster dries, voila, you have a cast of a person who once lived in that house. So that's what they had at that exhibit. Of course, it's closed now, but you could write about something like that. Of course, as would have to be a work of art from one of their houses. We're going to cover that. You're going to see some of the things in Pompeii in this course that are on the syllabus, and a few that aren't. They've unearthed about 3/4 of it, but they're still finding new sites even now. Okay, so a museum exhibit. That one, by the way, the Immersive Van Gogh, it's kind of a light show. So in a way, it's not an art museum exhibit, but it's all Van Gogh painting, imagery. It could qualify. So if you're not sure, check with me. But I'll tell you what won't qualify. A Thomas Kincaid, painter of schlock, some people. I mean, I actually like some of his paintings, but that's a gallery where they're selling art. A museum, the bottom line is, if you're not sure, check with me. But of course, you can probably figure out for yourself. If you want 10 points credit, all you have to do is show me proof you attended that museum. And it's usually a ticket stub, a screenshot of whatever. The RSVP, you know, to go to a museum now, you have to reserve ahead, but they are open, but you have to wear masks, of course, with social distancing. So you can't just walk in. But you can go to art museums. They haven't closed them. So that could be in Santa Rosa. There's a couple in Sonoma County, right? Petaluma has a history museum, and there's some works of art in there. Sculpture, photography, paintings from the frontier times. That would qualify. So any museum where there are works of art that aren't for sale, that's the bottom line. That's worth 10 points. You can do that twice. Go to 2 different museums, you'd earn 20 points, extra credit. Okay, so now let us look at the second option. This is at the top of the second page of this handout. Okay. Going to an architectural site. Well, I can tell you right now that is easier than it would have been before the pandemic, because they used to require you to go inside the building, whatever building you took photos of it, and get at least 3 shots of the interior details plus 1 exterior. That isn't feasible now. So all you have to do is take 4 photos of the exterior of any interesting building. I used to say it had to be historic, but that's too limiting. It can be a modern building, not a Costco warehouse style place, or one of those, a big box store. Obviously, that's not an interesting work of architecture. Those are mass produced. I don't think anyone even designs those. So any building where there's some interest, it could be a church, a mosque, a synagogue, a historic home, a building with a museum, and then you got a twofer. You take pictures of the building first, and then you go inside and get the ticket stub or some kind of image to prove that you were at that museum, and you get another 10 points. So that's a pretty easy one. And when I get to my qualifications, before I segue to you writing your mini bios, which we're going to do all that before the break, and then take a slightly early break and talk about how to take slides. And like I said, notes, I meant on slides. We'll just do 4 slides after the break. Okay, so emailing me articles, number 3, the third option here on the second page. I think a couple of you just joined us here. For extra credit this is a no-brainer. Any article relating to art that is at least 1 full page, doesn't have to have an illustration, of visual art, not dance, not singing, nothing wrong with those forms of art, but they're performing arts. Of course, what is visual arts? For this course, the definition is very specific. 5 types of visual arts that we cover, 4 of them in this class, because there was no photography before 1500, obviously. But for your papers and for extra credit, you can do photography. So we'll start photography, painting, sculpture, drawing, and all the types of drawings, engravings and everything, and architecture. Those are the 5 main categories of visual arts. So any article about any of those types of arts and you send me a PDF of it. I don't want a link. I don't want to have to go navigate links. Sometimes I can't open them, and then I go back and forth between you and the first email and another email. Just send me a PDF of the actual article that I can quickly see. It's at least a page, and it's about visual art, and you get 5 points. You can do that 4 times. There we go. During the semester for 20 points. Each category you can do 20 points worth. I figure that's reasonable. So I'm trying to get people, if you want to do extra credit, you don't have to do any if you don't feel the need. But if you do, I'd like to think you'd want to vary it. So you don't just do everything in one category. I used to not have a limitation, and then everybody just did articles and nobody got out to see art. Since you still can, in a safe, right, socially distanced way, go to a museum or go see an architectural site. I'd like to encourage that for those who want to do extra credit. But it's up to you which categories, of course, you choose. All right, the 5th one isn't likely. Oh, sorry, 4, I almost skipped. This is a new one I just created recently. You can watch a feature film or a documentary. It has to be at least 60 minutes. That's a reasonable minimum. About the life and career of any visual artist. Then write a 2-page summary of what you learned about that artist's life and their work. 10 points. That should be a fun one for, at least many of you. And if you'd like a couple of suggestions, I could come up with several, but I'll start with one about Van Gogh, which I think most people have never heard of, but it's the best movie about the life of an artist I've ever seen, any artist, and definitely the best biopic, I guess they call it, of Van Gogh's own life. And it was the first ever made about Van Gogh in 1956, that far back. And it's called Lust for Life with, of all things, Kirk Douglas. Some of you know who he is. You probably, what? He's playing Van Gogh. He won several awards, acting awards, and he should have gotten the Academy Award. He was nominated for Best Actor that year. You forget you're watching Kirk Douglas. He really obviously inhabited that role, as the phrase actors use. So that would be I gotta warn you, it breaks your heart, that movie. But because his life, most of you know this, his story was tragic. But it doesn't have myths, and it is a myth about Van Gogh that we may get to at some point in the, let's see, tonight's early. Yeah, we may talk about it. Yeah, actually, we have a Van Gogh slide, even though it's not part of the period we're covering, but just as an introductory slide after the break for you to get the hang of taking the notes the way you need to. So when we get to that, I'll mention this in more detail, but I'm just going to tell you up front, he didn't cut his ear off. Nope. He hurt himself, but he didn't cut his ear off, and he did not send his ear to a prostitute. Those are myths that keep getting repeated over and over. The evidence is very clear that neither one of those is accurate. Okay, so that would be something you could learn from a movie or a documentary about, him or any other artist. There's plenty about, Van Gogh and, of course, Picasso. I mean, you get the idea. They're all, whatever subject interests you within the visual arts. It doesn't have to be from an work of art or an artist during the period of this class. Sorry. I know. I believed it too. And there's also something else, as long as you brought that up. Everybody saw that, right? There's another uncertainty. I won't say a myth because there's still a debate. He might not have committed suicide. He could have been shot by someone else. And there's a lot more research on that lately. And I will talk about it when we have that slide on the screen after the break. Okay, in fact, I'll even give the title of the book that has the most thorough and credible research by 2 art historians who dug up some new evidence that he didn't commit suicide. Now, I on that one, I don't know. It's so recent that they're still debating whether the new evidence is credible as the assumption that he shot himself in a wheat field painting his last painting. It's 50-50 whether that's true. It might be a myth. But that's part of what we're here for, is to learn about things that can be verified and those that aren't, and open to interpretation. That's what art is often. It's supposed to be open to interpretation unless the artist themselves tells you, this is what I intended, and I don't want you to misinterpret it. And some artists get that way about their work, and they have every right to. Then we want to stick to what that artist intended. But we're going to such an early period of history that we don't always know, because some of these works of art, there's no written record even who the artist was. But we'll have somewhere we actually do know. Toward the end of the course, we'll start talking about the influence of the artist's life or philosophy on that work of art. because we start to get to know who the artists were, usually by Roman times, but not always, but certainly by the Middle Ages we do. Okay, so the last category is, sorry, two more. I'll make this first one brief because it's unlikely. Number 5, attending a walking tour of architecture. I used to give those, I should say, every semester. And sometimes I'd have 15, 20 people. A couple times I had 50 people show up. It's more than I really wanted. But anyway, the point is it would be one Sunday near the end of the semester in Berkeley, my hometown, of course, where I know the owners of these historic homes. And we would go inside the homes of 3 or 4 houses that are never open to the public. I don't know if that's feasible for obvious reasons. If it is, you'll hear about it and I'll give you an email, and that will be worth 20 points because it's like you driving to Berkeley, right? And then, obviously you have to plan ahead for that. And it's an afternoon, 2.5 hours. And we may do a version where we don't go inside buildings, but I think that's part of the attraction. So I'll have to give that some thought. But last but not least is another one of these easy, almost, I won't say no brainers, but very easy to get more points than 10, and that's downloading either one or both of the 2 novels that I have had published on Amazon Kindle, and they're sitting with literary agents now, but that's not the point. I vetted them with the academic senate, the department chair, the dean, everybody, to make sure it was appropriate, to just give you the option. You totally forget about them after this, but if you might want to take a look on Amazon Kindle, there are 2 art theme related novels that I wrote because my parents were literally the ubiquitous starving artists. Quite literally, there were times, I'm not exaggerating, I knew what it was like to go to bed hungry for weeks at a time. When my dad would do a work of art for some small company or even a big corporation, would even be more common, and not get paid or be paid half what he was promised. What could he do? Go to a lawyer? Artists don't have any clout if they're not famous, right? So that's what the first one is. It's semi-autobiographical. South Side Story, a novel of Chicago in the early 60s. I'll give you one legitimate hook to how that could be at all relevant to any of you now and the current social debate we have on social justice, not just since George Floyd's death, but even before. When I was growing up in Chicago, and by the way, it's the South Side of Chicago, is Obama's old neighborhood where he lived after he, graduated from school for many years and taught law, right? I grew up in that neighborhood, and the Black Muslims were very, very prevalent. And Malcolm X would come regularly to the local mosque, and people who looked like me weren't allowed in the mosque. You probably knew that, right? The Black Muslims, I'm talking about, not all Muslims, obviously. I've been to many mosques, and you're going to see the interiors of some beautiful mosques in this class that won't be requiring you to take notes when we get to Istanbul, right, and Cairo. But anyway, the point is that at that point, he would give lectures that were broadcast on a PA system outside this mosque in Southside. And my mother one day said, we got to go hear this guy. He's too important, for us to just read about him and somebody's opinion of him in the newspaper or a magazine. So I got to hear him give a rather rousing sermon, right? So that things like that are in this novel. So that's one. And the other one is the Open House Murders. Now that might say, what could that have to do with art? It does, because it's an architecturally focused or themed book. It's about a former realtor. Yes, I was a real estate agent before I became a professor, and I burned out on it. But for a while, I had clients. Eldridge Cleaver, some of you know who he was, So on Ice during the Panthers. He wasn't a Panther, but he was friends with them. I don't know. Anyway, he was an Oakland, Berkeley local. And I helped him find an apartment when I was a real estate agent. He walked into our office and he wanted an apartment. He couldn't afford fancy, expensive. That's when rents were still reasonable, but he couldn't even afford the going rent. So it was a task to find him a decent place to live with him and his wife. Anyway, so this is about the 90s, pre-internet era of a murder mystery. I won't go into the details of that, but the settings of almost every one of the clue-based scenes and where the bodies are found in each one of those scenes are set in historically interesting places. You can go see them yourself. And if you were to look at the novel and actually read it, you don't have to read it. You don't have to prove to me you read it to get extra credit. You just have to download it and show me either an order from Amazon Kindle or the last chapter as a screenshot. That way I'll know you didn't just look at the free preview. Everyone knows this, right? Amazon Kindle, you can look at any book for the first 2 chapters. You don't have to even, do anything. It's just right there. You click on the cover of the book. So that would mean you didn't download it, right? If I only saw the first chapter. So just send me the last chapter. I'll probably remind you of all these extra credit options and more than once during the semester with separate emails. But anyway, that's easy to do. And if you send me either an order from Amazon with the title of the book, and obviously it needs to be one of the two that I wrote. I don't think anyone else uses these titles, but they could have. And that's worth 15 points just for downloading it. And if you choose to write a review, good, bad, or ugly, I mean, I've had about 60 some reviews, and the first novel, and the second one was posted a year later, the murder mystery. It's like 50 reviews or something. They're all over the place, but most of them are, nice. But you say what you want. It's called free speech. If you actually read part or all of it, you can then get 5 more points extra credit by posting a brief review. Doesn't have to be long, about that book. And if you did that for both novels, that would be 10 points for downloading. 5 for posting the review would be 15 points. Times, if you did both, you'd be getting 30 points right there. So you have all these options, quite a few. I'll read them to you. They're on this handout, but I will read them to you. South Side Story, a novel of Chicago in the early 60s. That's the starving artist family autobiographical one, obviously set in the early 1960s, the Kennedy era, right? Now, yes, I remember when he was on TV. The other one is The Open House Murders, and the subtitle of that is an offbeat San Francisco thriller set in the early 90s. I did a lot of research on these. I didn't just go from memory of being a realtor or being a kid in Chicago. I researched these. The jazz clubs I came up with in the Chicago one, they're still there, some of them, and they're world famous. And even the ones that aren't, some of the musicians that used to play there, not many are left alive from that far back, but there's some, guys in there. Oh, John Lee Hooker, I never heard him. But anyway, people like that. If you don't know anything about blues and jazz, well, that might make it interesting to look it up for yourself. But of course, that is just a sidebar. The point is it's an easy option to get extra credit and may or may not appeal to you enough to want to read. That's up to you. Okay. Any questions about extra credit? Sorry, I didn't see that last chat in time. I'm going to put it up again. Yeah.
I got a question, not about extra credit, but
yes, please. Now,
did you send the same Zoom ID code to everybody, or did you type
okay, thank you. Somebody pointed this out. It's a mea culpa. It's on me. I think I put an extra 6 in the first one, so I resent it with the correct number.
Did you resend it?
Yeah, I did. Oh yeah, I saw on the screen it said 2 emails from tonight. The second one, I double checked the numbers. I don't know if that's what happened with the first one, but that's what a couple of your fellow students at the beginning of tonight's session thought. That's why not everybody could log on, and I apologize. That's happened about once a semester. This is my 3rd time of teaching Zoom. I don't think it'll happen again in this class now that you guys have made me aware. So I'm sorry about that, but you obviously got through. Can I ask you what time, does it say what time the email came through?
I did not get a second email. I still have one with 2 extra 6s, and I just plugged the numbers in until it worked.
Okay. Yeah, I sent a second one. I'm sure of that because it occurred to me that could have happened, obviously, when only 5 people had enrolled. So I don't know why you didn't see the second one. Who knows? Maybe because 2 of the same topic in the same website.
Did anyone else?
Yeah.
Did anyone else get a second one?
Well, that's all I could do is once I thought through what the issue was, probably. No one had told me that was the issue, but I guess that it might be. Yeah, it's really weird when they have, actually the total number of 6s in that was more than 3, and they were spaced oddly. So that's not an excuse. I apologize. But congratulations. I'm not being flippant here. I hope it doesn't. I'm trying not to be. I appreciate your persistence, everyone who got through. It's not going to happen again. Okay.
Sent the second one around 6.
Yeah. It was right at 6:30. I know most of you would have given up if you couldn't got through the first time.
Okay, so some people got it and some people didn't.
That's interesting. And that worries me. Yeah, it shouldn't happen again and be even necessary, be even an issue, because here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring a magnifying glass to the screen and put it up there, because those numbers, when I see them on the meeting info, right, drop down list. I don't know if you ever hosted, that's what we have to do when we host it. they're very small and they're all crammed together, but I almost never make a mistake. But yes, I did tonight. And again, I apologize. Sorry about that. So I'll just be extra cautious and careful. And I don't think you'll have that issue again. But thank you for your persistence and, you know, determination. It's worth it. Now, anyone who missed the class, I will send an email after I log off tonight, after the last question is done, to let people know. If you didn't already, I sent an email before, like 3 or 4 days ago. It was, yeah, right, last week, that you can catch any lecture or part of a lecture you miss on YouTube at 7 p.m. on the Friday of that week's lecture for the whole semester. So you have that backup. Yeah. Let's see. That was a good point. Yeah, I've had students say they didn't see any of the attachments I sent or the email with them even. But then I'd think, wait a minute, that can't be right. How are you getting in touch with me if you on Mark W at AOL unless you saw my original email, which had the attachments on it? But I understand it. It's not always easy to navigate. I have no idea what a student portal looks like. Obviously, I've never been an SRJC student, so I only know what the faculty portal looks like. But anyway, let's just move on now because we want to, get to one more thing before we take an early break. Are there any other questions though before I switch gears to the mini bio? What that means for some of you just joined recently.
Yeah, what was that book you recommended?
Oh well, are you talking about the extra credit novels or the required?
The one you talked about probably 15 minutes ago. A book you said we should get.
Oh, it's about Van Gogh. Is that what you're talking about?
I have no clue anything about it. I just heard you say we need a book.
Well, you need 2 textbooks.
Okay.
And they are on the SIL. I already covered them.
Okay.
All right. Don't forget though, as long as you brought this up, there's other people joined a little later as you did, I guess. And that's only volume 1. Don't waste your time and money trying to get both volumes of Stocksted's Art History and Gill, The Critic Sees, which is a paperback. So when you find used copies of either one, they're way less than half of the outrageously expensive cover prices. So those are the 2 books you need, but that's already on the handout that everyone should have had by now. And if not, you should check your, like this other student just said, double check, because it went through to almost everybody with 3 attachments. The one we just finished covering, the grading policies, and we're going to segue in a little while to the syllabus and the terms to know, which will be after the break, something you want to have next to your laptop every time we cover slides, because some of those terms will come up in chronological order for each lecture. Oh, okay. Hang on. Let me see if I can enter it. Okay. Wait a minute. Shoot. Now, now I'm not sure. I haven't done it this way. The raising the hand icon, I didn't see it. So does that person?
I have a question.
Yes, please just go ahead and verbally. It's faster.
I made sure to double check what was required for textbooks, and I didn't see the Critic Sees as a required one. So I'm going to order it tonight if it is required for the class readings. Is there another option?
It's on the syllabus, but it's also at the top. Also at the top of this handout that we just finished going over. So the reason it's valuable, even though it isn't the directly related to the slide lectures, is that it'll help all of you be more effective at writing papers about works of art. And we're going to go over how to do that in class. I already said this, so I want to keep repeating it. The paper's not due till the 7th week, I think it is. Yeah, you got about 6 weeks at least.
Okay, my follow-up question to that one was, is there another alternative to read from it while we wait for the textbook to come in?
Oh.
Because you've assigned.
Yeah, I understand that dilemma. I don't know what I can do about that. I don't think there is, because I don't want you going off to another. Well, for looking at the slides, you could just go on Google. All of them are somewhere on an art website that you guys all know better than I do how to navigate those things. So that's your alternative. As far as reading the text, you just have to wait it's not a lot of reading, I'll tell you that. We're talking about 1 chapter, well, 2 if you count both textbooks per week. And the chapters aren't 50 pages long. So you probably just would catch up when you get the books. Hopefully you order them from somewhere like Amazon where they don't take too, well, they shouldn't more than a few days to arrive. But of course, I don't know what kind of account you have, so I can't really do much about that. Yeah, you kind of just need to catch up when the time comes. But in the meantime, if you just want to look at the slides to double check your notes or otherwise look ahead, is that what you're saying for next week's lecture, for instance? If you didn't get the book before next Monday, that could happen. Then just look at those slides on a good art website. I think art.com is, I can't remember. I don't want to give you more inaccurate information. You guys all know how to navigate, right? The websites not navigate a search engine like, sorry, Google, to find images of specific works of art. You could just plug in the titles from the syllabus. So that would give you some kind of filling in. But you should have the book by next lecture, I would hope. And like I said, I don't believe in massive amounts of reading that overwhelm students. I hated that when I was a student at Berkeley. You will read 3 500-page textbooks. Yeah, and then forget all of it, by the time it's time to take your test. So it's just a few, pages, 20 maybe each week in each book, okay, or 30 at most. Okay, so let's segue now, if we can, to writing your mini bios. Here's what I'm going to do. You can do them during the break so we don't eat up time, with that during the lecture period. But what I wanted you to do is to just don't take more than, half a page is about right. Maybe 3 short paragraphs or 1 long paragraph, less than a page. And here are the 3 things. I said it earlier, but some of you have just joined recently. So here we go. Number 1 thing to write about is your background or experience, I should say, in your work experiences and your educational experiences. What kinds of education you've had. And no, don't go back to grade school, but from high school on. And the most important jobs. If you've had multiple jobs, I know many of you have, just mention the most important ones. Okay, that's the first thing. Second thing would be to tell me where you've traveled or lived, if anywhere outside the Bay Area. Most of you have left the Bay Area, right? And even if it is only in California, just mention some of the more interesting places. And again, just the highlights. If you've been to 40 countries, that's, in my case, that's a fact or more. You don't want to list them all, but just the ones that were most interesting. And then finally, very short and sweet, you could just say, what do you want to learn from this class? Within the context of this period that we're covering, from prehistoric to medieval art and so-called Western art, all the topics covered in the syllabus. You could even glance at the syllabus to give you an idea, but you probably already know. Are you more interested in ancient Egypt? You want to know more about that? Because I might spend a little more time than I otherwise would in those lectures. But anyway, lets me know what your interests and your backgrounds are. Also, it helps me take roll. That's the other reason I asked you to do this. So if you don't get it done during the break, don't sweat it. You can get it to me by the end of the week. And I will send an email to remind people, and I will give you 1 week's extension in case, because I know some students have already emailed me saying they couldn't make this week's class because they're out. One of them was fighting fires. Kind of important. So of course I would give someone like that a pass. But the point is I have to drop by the 3rd week. I have to turn in the no-show drops. And this is to avoid that, a way for you to verify, even if you didn't attend the lecture or ever speak up. I don't want us to waste time. Like, we're not in high school to read all these names every week, or even the first 3 weeks. So as long as you get me a mini bio either this week or at the very latest, anyone who's not with us tonight, I will remind you by email by the end of next week. But sooner the better. If you can do it tonight, it's off your plate. And I log you in as having turned it in, and then I get a better background overview of where all of you, are coming from in terms of your interests and your experiences. Okay, we'll do that at the break. All right, let's see. How are we doing on the time here? That's right, it doesn't have it there. So yeah, we have time for this segue. Not segue, this other topic. If you take out your syllabus, now's a good time to glance at the syllabus and to go not over the whole thing. That we don't need to do that. We're going to do that week by week. But I think you can see that I'm going to cut down these lists by at least 40% before each of the 2 exams. But they're open book anyway. However, so you don't even have to think about that. What is it? 40%, that's 2/5 of the total. You will make sure you attend or watch the YouTube recording of the week before each of the exams. You definitely want to do that because that's when we cut this list down before the midterm. And then again, I've already said this, but some of you just joined late, I guess, or later, is that the final's not cumulative. So before each exam, I will go over with you as a group each list of slides for each week and cut the total list down by 40%. So it makes it a little easier for you not to have to even worry about those slides. Okay, so we're not going to talk about the individual works now. We're going to do that after the break when we get to the first 4 slides. That'll be after a 15-minute break. What we are going to do now is spend a few minutes on a discussion about what is art. That's such a generic question and so broad that it almost is meaningless, right? I mean, I've had students write definitions of art. I used to do it that way instead of having these mini bios. It just didn't really work very well because, you know, what are you going to say? Your opinion about art is right or wrong? No, there's no right or wrong, at least in terms of aesthetic opinions and perceptions. Art is what is in the eye of the beholder, as one person put it, one art historian not that long ago, about 40 years ago. Robert Hughes, I think his name, was really excellent. He had a whole PBS series and then books and then a second series. Yeah, of course, that's just the obvious fact. So how do we get at or address the concept of how different people perceive different works of art? By talking about a very specific controversy, I'm going to summarize it in a few minutes, that happened in New York City in 2000, beginning, well, actually the last year of the 20th century. You know, that wasn't it, because Prince's song, he got it wrong. 1999 wasn't the year before the new millennium. It was 2000, but whatever, people don't think that way. So 2000, turn of the century, right? There was an exhibit in New York City that was not only controversial there, it made national headlines. And it involved someone you've all heard of, unless you haven't been paying attention to any of the news having to do with domestic issues and political stuff since the election. Rudy Giuliani, when he was mayor of New York, this controversy happened under his watch, and he took a completely 180-degree different position than someone else you've heard of, Hillary Clinton, who was running for Senate from New York. And I think you all know she won that and then became, of course, right, Secretary of State afterwards. So this is when the two of them were fighting over this issue, was one of the campaign issues. What was the debate about? It was an exhibit called Scandal or Scandalous. You know, I always forget which of the two words it was. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I almost got it wrong. Sensation. I apologize. That was the title of the exhibit. Just that one word, sensation. Why was it controversial? Well, first, it opened in London, and these are all British artists or other European nationals, you know, from other parts of Europe, but who were living in Britain, and their careers were there. And it caused the same kind of reaction in London, which is a pretty, you know, cosmopolitan, metropolitan city as it is, a liberal city, as is New York, of course. And when it came to New York, the same controversy and debate exploded. It literally it was on PBS, CNN did specials, there were newspaper articles about it, magazines even. It went on for months. Why? Because that exhibit, Sensation, had several deliberately offensive works of art that the artists themselves said with their intention was to offend people, but for various reasons, different reasons. And since we have limited time, I'm going to just well, actually, we have enough time. I'd like to hear, and there's no right or wrong, and you don't have to say a word. In this class, you can get an A without saying a word, but I would like to think, and I'm sure a few of you will have an opinion, one way or the other, about this, and please feel free to express that opinion after I summarize what the controversy was about. The most controversial work was one called Child Molester. Already from the title, you might guess that there was something a little creepy about it. It was a giant 10-foot tall, I knew it was 10 feet tall, you know, much larger than life image of the face of a convicted and a confessed multiple child murderer. And it was a woman from Britain, middle-aged woman, who had tortured to death several young children. And when she was caught and tried, she not only didn't deny it, she acted like she was proud of it. And so this image was a picture of her face pixelated on the wall of this exhibit in this museum. It was the Brooklyn Museum of Art, by the way, which you could check that on your own. And I'm giving you the generic title that the public gave it, that the media gave it. It had another name for the woman's name. I don't remember her last name or her first name, but everyone just called it child molester. And they knew what, during this debate, they knew what that meant. What was controversial about that, you can guess maybe a little, but I'll be very specific. What caused Giuliani to get so angry, he tried to shut that museum down because they wouldn't remove that work of art, were three things. First of all, the pixels, right, that were used to make this large image of this child murderer's face. By the way, she was smirking. The picture was of her as she was made from a photo, of course, taken in court as she was led away after being sentenced to life in prison. You know, even back then, they didn't have capital punishment in England. So she was sentenced to life in prison, which is, you know, the harshest punishment they could send her to. So anyway, as she's led out of court, she smirked at the parents of the children she killed. So this artist just used that moment in that image. That was mildly controversial, but much more so was how were the pixels made? They were dozens and dozens of tiny inks, you know, images of the faces of 50 years of murdered children throughout the British Isles from the previous 50 years, from like the 50s to the turn of the century. I think some of you already can see why that was controversial, but maybe if you don't, we'll get to that in a minute. There were issues with that alone, right? Another one was the fact that it was someone, well, I just said that, you know, who had no remorse for what they'd done. They actually almost felt, it seemed like they were bragging as they left court. And that's the particular expression on the face of this child molester that the artist chose to convey. And the last part of the controversy, there were no age limits or any kind of limits on who could come see that exhibit. And there was a K through 6, I guess it was, school up the street, public school, that let out well before the museum closed. And kids were coming in, some of them with their older schoolmates or their older siblings, typically. I didn't do this with my younger brothers. I remember cousins of mine that would take their younger siblings and try to scare them. Well, that happened quite often. Some like 6th grader would take a kindergartner or 1st or 2nd grader and say, hey, we want to see something interesting. Let's go to the museum. And then in front of that exhibit, they see that woman, you know what she did? That's what's going to happen to you, you know, when you're asleep. Yeah. It happened multiple times, enough that it made the news in New York City, that parents were complaining to the museum that, why aren't you limiting the access? No adults are required to be accompanying these kids. They're walking in off the street, and some of them are waking up with nightmares, some of the little ones. No exaggeration. And so parents who were even maybe, I'm not getting partisan, that's not appropriate. It's not about politics or, you know, party politics anyway. But the fact is, parents of both conservative and liberal persuasions in that neighborhood were complaining. And even whatever they thought about Giuliani, by the way, he was popular mayor. He was reelected twice, actually, I think it was. Yeah, two terms anyway. So this is before 9/11, of course, and it was in his 2nd term, and that's why he was finishing up a term and he was about to run for Senate. He thought he didn't get elected. In case you didn't know that, Hillary did, right? But anyway, so that controversy played out in that campaign. Speaking of which was the debates on TV that they had, where Giuliani's position was that's so offensive and it's so disturbing. And this museum is partially, not fully, but partially funded by a city of New York taxpayers' funds. So I have the right to tell them to take that out, that exhibit, or at least that one work of art. He had a second one. I don't have time to go into that. It was objected to on religious grounds. So he wanted 2 works of art that he found offensive removed, or else he would yank the funding from the museum for the next year, which would force them to close. They wouldn't be able to, or at least for half the year or so, because I think it was half their funding roughly came from the city. Well, then Hillary took a different position, you might imagine. She said, that's censorship. Not only that, it's worse. It's censorship after the fact, because that museum had public hearings months before the exhibit arrived from London, and people in London were already talking about what was in that exhibit. He could have, you know, he's busy. He said, I couldn't go to their hearings. Well, no, of course, he's a mayor of a city of 8 million, but he has people working for him. They're supposed to keep an eye on, assigned to public institutions like museums. So he was saying, well, I didn't have a fair chance to know what was in it, but it's already open now. And I'm sorry, I think it's an offense to most decent citizens. So he tried to get the museum to remove it by pressuring them that way. Okay, so with that, all those facts in mind, what we have now, I think you can see, are some issues that, you know, obviously could be relevant today, right, to works of art or public art or controversial displays of one kind or another. So what are Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's good. I'm glad you choose to do it that way. I was going to say either by, texting or, well, in this case, I guess, chat. You can comment that way, but I hope some of you also do it orally, as in, speak up if you have. I just would like to know, let's see.
Oh, I'm not afraid of speaking if you want me to put that.
Sure. Yeah, please go ahead. That's what we're here for. There's no right or wrong, and I believe in freedom of speech.
No, yeah, I don't believe in censorship either. And I guess if it was like actual photos of murdered children that other children might be seeing, like crime scene photos, I would say that's probably going too far. But since it's just photos of kids, even though they had a tragic history, and it's just a photo of a monster of a person, unless you had that older brother telling you what that monster did or what happened to those kids, it wouldn't affect anybody adversely, I wouldn't think.
All right. No one, that's an original observation. Believe it or not, in all the years I've been teaching, I haven't used this example all 25 years I've been teaching there, but starting around 10 years ago, I figured this was a good topic to get discussions going, to get people thinking about controversial works of art and what is and isn't appropriate, if anything, or censorship. Okay, I understand your point. The pictures were of the kids that appeared in the newspapers and they went missing. But how about this? I'm not pointing fingers or anything.
I'm ready to go. Let's go.
What? Well, no, yeah. I mean, it's just please respond, and others too, if you can see a potential downside to that or negative side to that. What about the families? Because a lot of these parents were still alive, whose kids had been murdered, and they're being subjected to knowing their murdered child's image is on a work of art, which, not that this is wrong, but here's the fact. Just ended with this, and then you guys, anyone, speak up, please, which is that artist said, all I'm doing is holding a mirror up to society. And so he said that wasn't anything he had any moral qualms about. But that's not how a lot of people in two very liberal cities, New York and London, are not conservative cities. At least they weren't by 2000. We're picketing the museum saying, how dare you profit? Because the guy sold that work of art for about somewhere between $250,000 and $500,000 after the museum closed. I don't know how they got it off the wall. They probably had to take the plaster and everything. But somebody bought it for their whatever weird collection of art. But that's their right, and it's a right of the museum.
No,
it's a right of the artist to make the money.
I would be pretty upset if I were a parent.
Yeah, that's my point.
At some point, he doesn't have the right to profit off of their misery.
That's the point that the parents and some other critics like Giuliani were making. Okay, anybody else feel that the way Giuliani handled it in terms of after the exhibit opened, threatening the museum with funding cuts, was censorship? And if so, was it a justifiable move or not? Anybody else?
I think, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Yes, I can.
I think one of the only negative reasons about that, because it's his art, but it portrays a murderer, and it gives them sort of a stand, and it might show other horrible people that, oh, if I do these things, I might get put on a huge pedestal.
I know that's a very good point. And it's funny because not for several years of discussion, maybe 3 or 4 of my classes now, or semesters in a row at least, has anyone pointed that out as a possible issue, because of course we're bombarded with every day. So in one way, the artist is not making up or exaggerating by saying, oh, I'm just putting a mirror up to society, and it's what we see every day. But yes, if you do that, like the guy that killed the 9 people at the transit yard in San Jose, I know he was gone after that, but I think he knew he was going to get massive attention. And we know some people post that as one of the reasons before they do these heinous acts. And sadly, some of those people are still around. They're still waiting trial. Like, what's his name down in Florida? Was it 17 teenage? Yeah, that bothers me personally. I'm a parent, by the way. I think I said that early on, but some of you didn't join the class at the start because of my slip up on the numbers. Sorry. I have an 18-year-old daughter. She just finished high school, and she got her first job this summer, and she was harassed. It was at the Safeway in our neighborhood 3 or 4 times, verbally mostly. I hate to say sexually, but it was sexual verbal harassment. Harassment is wrong no matter what context it comes in. Of course, it is illegal, but she just come home in tears, and as a parent, I just felt powerless. Multiply that by about 100 times to be a parent of someone whose kid was murdered, and that murderer showed no remorse, and they're now being blown up for the world to see. Yeah, I could see why people get
can you share the remarks that person said about your daughter, or no? Is that too?
Yeah, she did. She shared them with us after she calmed down the next day. And you know what? The manager of it was in the deli section of, if you ever know someone's going to work for Safeway, tell them, really make sure you get that manager, which me and my wife said this to the manager. She's not good around hot oils and burn. She came on with burns on her arms, even with the gloves. They don't go all the way up to your, elbow and all. Yeah, no. Yeah, so it was in the deli, some guy that was working in the deli with her. And that's a confined, at least in this Safeway, a confined space. So the manager wasn't there that week. And when I went in the next time to talk to the manager, he said, I've already heard what happened. He was leaving. That's why he thought he'd get away with it. He's back in Chicago on a scholarship to the Art Institute of Chicago, where my parents met when they were art students, and where the greatest collection of paintings in the United States is. If you don't know that, check out their website. You're going to see, if you take art 2.2 or 2.3, everything from around the Impressionists on, they've got the most famous images. And yet this guy, here he is, an art student, and he's harassing my daughter. Don't worry, this is not appropriate to say a single hint of what he said. Oh yeah, it would qualify as harassment, and not just to a parent. So the manager of the deli said, if I'd been here, if it happened the week before, while I was not on vacation, or I'd heard about it, I'd have canned his, I won't repeat the last word, because that's a violation of all kinds of regulations. Yeah, but there wasn't much she could do about it. The guy was leaving and the manager was away on vacation. Yeah, but that's minor compared to what the parents who suffered the loss of a child would. Okay, anybody else think anything about what Hillary, well, either one's position, Hillary's or Rudy's, whether you agree or disagree with either one about the censorship issue, and whether censorship after the fact is wrong? Like, is it worse than if he didn't speak up, or have someone in his administration tell the museum that was offensive and they might get their funding removed? He didn't. He waited till after the exhibit was open, and then, oops, okay, now I want to do that. Anybody think that's right or wrong for any reason? Nope. Okay, well, again, it's just, you don't have to say a word, but I imagine this has got to have some resonance with many of you. All right, then let's do one last thing before I tell you what the State Supreme Court of New York, they had to intervene. If they hadn't, this controversy would have kept going on probably for God knows how long, but they did. They made a ruling, and I think they got it right. I'll tell you what that was in just a minute before we take our break. And that's this. Before that, what about the age limitations? Does anybody find that odd? There was no age limits or enforcement of any kind. So let me phrase it, because we want to cut to the chase here and take our break. But can anybody think of any other visual art form where there are limits on age access? I think you know what.
Porn.
Say again.
Movies,
what?
just movies.
Yeah, movies for 40 years, since the 80s. Supreme Court upheld the right of the film industry to do that. And people accept that, because there are different levels of what's offensive, and there's some common ground. It's not easy to agree in a multicultural society like ours, but nonetheless, some people can agree that certain things are not appropriate for little kids to see. So the museum was, I think, a little off base on that. Yeah. Of course, what else? Video games. I think some CDs, certain entertainment venues, where either performing live or projected art is seen, inside. Yeah, there are age limits all over. So why wouldn't the museum think? They just didn't think that through. Okay, so here's what actually happened. When the Supreme Court made their ruling of New York State, they ended the controversy this way. They said to Giuliani, back off. You do not, as a mayor of a city, have the right to force a museum to remove any single work of art, let alone a whole exhibit. And especially not if it's after the fact. That is censorship. It's a violation of the museum's right to freedom of speech and those artists' right. So he had to back off his threats. But then they turned around to the museum and said, but you also had a responsibility to the social norms that we have all accepted since films began in the 80s to be rated for age limitations. So anyone under the age of what's an adult in New York State is 18, right? Should not be admitted without an accompanying adult. And you need to put a partition around the entrance of the exhibit, and have a museum personnel standing there to check people's age. it's pretty reasonable. But you know what happened though? After that, and the museum did agree they had been remiss, and they closed for a few days, got the partition up, and then hired a security or whatever, I don't know, a docent to be there at the entrance to that exhibit, and enforced the rule the way the station court required them to. The attendance at that museum quintupled. It went up 500%. That means among people who paid to be members of the museum, it's how they get most of their money. You know, over half of it came from that and the rest from the city. So art won out, you could say it that way, as in not a person, but the concept of the ability to see the art. Of course, it made those artists that were in that exhibit, all of them, much more successful and famous. So the attempt at censorship by Giuliani backfired. And I guess we're coming up right on 8. So I'll just give you one more little tidbit you could check for yourself. Giuliani withdrew from the race for Senate that year because a scandal erupted when his wife went on. I remember seeing it live on camera. It was broadcast on CNN nationally, saying that he had been having an affair with one of his secretaries, who was like one of the lower paid people in his staff, and taking city money to that was hard to prove, but she alleged. In any case, it was a scandal that was of the same level as, let's say, Bill Clinton's in that ballpark. And he had to withdraw from that race because he wouldn't have won even the Republican vote then. So that's ironic, scandal upon scandal, right? Or one scandal after another, two different kinds of scandals. Anyway, I hope that gives you some idea of the way that art can be viewed in different contexts by different people with different perspectives. But there's no absolute right or wrong, except for the law, of course. That usually has a set of rules that you kind of have to adhere to, or you get consequences of not doing that. So anyway, I thought we should take about a 15-minute break, okay? I'm going to pause the recording now, and remember to re-record, or else this won't be on YouTube. And we're going to have some note paper or whatever form you use to take notes next to you, because we're going to go over the first 4 slides on the syllabus, and I will start slow and tell you how most effectively to take those notes. And we are going to include this one, you see it here, number 3 on the list for tonight, Van Gogh painting, and dispel a couple of the myths about him when we get to that. Okay, we'll see you all in 15 minutes. All right. I want to make sure this is recording. Okay, thank you. That is helpful, because the icon has changed, at least from the last time I recall, at the bottom when you hit, pause, which I did because who wants to watch 15 minutes of everyone on a break, when they check the YouTube lecture recording. So I'm sorry, that person, whoever it was, or anyone else, can you verify that from your end you can see it's recording? Because all it says,
I can see it.
Good, thanks.
Mine says recording.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay. So when it says pause, stop, that means if you hit that, it will do that, which I guess it's been 3.5 months since I did this last time. So you guys are being very helpful. I appreciate it. All right. Here's something I didn't do before the break, and I'll keep it brief, very brief. I didn't really give you much of a back. Oh, sorry. Is there somebody else joining us? No, there we go. Okay. If you've already come in and you're rejoining, I don't think I have to readmit you, right? But I always look to see if it says admit at the top upper right corner. This is the book on Julia Morgan. I can't remember, but I don't think I held it up. And I know I did this afternoon because that was a huge class. That's 45 students. And I had several questions. That's Hearst Castle. You've all heard of Hearst Castle, or at least many of you have, right? It's the largest private residence on the West Coast. Well, now it's Bill Gates' compound, although maybe not after his divorce. But anyway, this is a monument, national historic landmark. It's lovely. If you've never been there, it's worth a trip. Halfway between LA and San Francisco. Julia Morgan, the first woman independent architect, designed it. And that's a book I wrote. It's not required for this class. It is for the 1.2. But the point is, there are sites here, such as these 4 homes she designed in Petaluma that you could use for your extra credit architecture options. So if you want those addresses, if enough people ask me, more than one or two, I can put together a little attachment with the addresses and forward it to anybody who wants to know that. Yeah, they're each one's different, and they're all in their original condition. Of course, what's the assignment member? Some of you weren't here when we were doing the review of the extra credit options. Don't knock on their doors and ask to go inside. You wouldn't anyway in a pandemic. That's not an option. So you just take photos of the exterior of those 4 houses, and of course, then put them into a JPEG or I'm sorry, JPEG. I misspoke. Sorry. Right. Into a PDF, so I can open it quickly and see. And you have to write the location, the city, the town, what the buildings were, not in any detail, just a brief summary, the house and the address. That's good enough. And your name and the class, and you get 10 points. Okay. So that's one option. Another is to go to San Francisco. I don't think this is one. I've had 5 books published on architecture and 2 novels. So I'm working on another book now. In fact, I just in the middle of negotiating with the same publisher that published Sarah Gill's book and outrageously overcharges. So I'm working on trying to find out if they can get the cost down to something reasonable. Then I could have it as a text in one of my classes in 2023 probably. And it would be on the first women architects on the West Coast. It would include a chapter on Julia Morgan, of course, but there were people before her. They just weren't licensed and they weren't recognized by the American Institute of Architects, but they were designing buildings. And then some who came after her was still very early, like 1905, 1910. The stupid sexist attitude by most male clients was, oh, I don't want a woman design my building. It'll fall down. How ridiculous is that? Anyway, so if you don't know about Bernard Maybach, you probably won't ever hear his name again, but you can get extra credit by going to the Palace of Fine Arts in San Francisco. If you don't know what it is, you're going to recognize it, I think, from this picture here. It is the most iconic site in San Francisco after the Golden Gate Bridge. It's in every other movie, like half the movies filmed in San Francisco. Thousands, literally thousands, well, at least several hundred, if not over 1,000 weddings every year are held here. And Maybach designed that for the Bernard Maybach, that's what this book was about, for the World's Fair in 1915. And he was Julia Morgan's architecture teacher at UC Berkeley when there was no architecture department. He founded it. And he's the first green architect when the term didn't exist. First environmentally sensitive architect to say buildings should integrate with their height and be all made out of natural materials. So he's one of my heroes. And there are several sites of his in the Bay Area you could go take photos of. And of course, get extra credit. And then finally is the Frank Lloyd Wright book. This is the one that's, as you might guess, because he's the only architect most Americans have ever heard of, right? Oh, of course, the most famous American architect. That's a house in Carmel, which has been in several movies, actually. That's right, of course, on Carmel Bay. And so this is the only book so far, anyway, that was ever published about all of his buildings on the West Coast, one of which is easy for you to go take pictures of, the Marin County Civic Center in Santa Fe, right on 101. If you go during business hours, you can go inside that one, but you could just take pictures next year. So those might give you some ideas for extra credit. All right, let's now segue, and let me keep my fingers crossed that the screen share is going to work like it's supposed to. Yeah, it should. Okay, I'm going to maximize it now. And I'm going to, before I start the first slide and tell you how to take notes, can everybody see this? Can anybody see it? You should be able to.
Yeah.
Yes.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, I just want to be sure because there are times when glitches occur and I go bowling ahead and then I don't realize no one can see what I'm talking about. Okay, so on your syllabus each week, you'll see it's pretty obvious how this works. A list of slides that we're going to cover that night, and hopefully you've read before the class that night the chapters that are listed as reading, what to do, which chapter relates in either of the 2 texts to that week's lecture. So we're just doing a kind of an overview tonight of works of art that only one of them, I'll be honest with you, is in the period we're covering. But that's not the point of this first set of slides. It is to get you into the groove or whatever, the rhythm of taking notes in an effective and efficient way. So your hand doesn't fall off necessarily, hopefully, if you're writing them. And B, it'll help you more efficiently study for the midterm and the final. And or maybe you'll choose to write a paper about one of these works of art that you see in the class. You can do that, or you can pick works of art. Remember, I don't know if I said this, but I will when we talk about how to write the paper. That'll be the third week of class. You can pick any work of art from any period, from any artist, from any country, any culture, any style, as long as you find enough research on it to have sources to cite in your bibliography. All of that will be covered in a couple weeks. And the paper's not due till, I think it's the 6th week of the class. So you have some time. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to do it this way. I call the list slides, that are on your syllabus from those that list must know. That's my shorthand for you need to take notes. I will occasionally remove them as we go, not more than one a night, or maybe occasionally two, but probably not. But again, I already said this, but some of you weren't with us yet at the beginning of tonight when I said that I will then also remove 40% of the total. It's right here on your syllabus. The first note, N-O-T, right? Those are important details. You should always read those about upcoming deadlines, etc. But this one is about my promise to all my classes and all my students to reduce the list for studying for first the midterm. And then the second half, remember the final is not cumulative, that portion of the list again before the final, when we do a review, 40% at least of the total slides on those lists will be cut. But for now, assume any of them on the syllabus could be on the test. Okay, so here we go. The first one, I'll read you the titles slowly, spell the names once, or others who will never get through this semester. They're on your syllabus. So of course you obviously can double check that if you need to while you're writing the title. But here is the first slide we're going to discuss tonight. The 3 words, Libyan Sibyl. Okay, so Libyan is like the country, Libya, is spelled L-I-B-Y-A-N. And second word, Sibyl, S-I-B-Y-L. The artist's name is Michelangelo. Now, I imagine most of you know how to spell his name, but of course, I will spell that for you. M-I-C-H-E-L-A-N-G-E-L-O. It was actually his first name. He always signed his work that way. He became so famous all over the Western world at that time, which was really Europe and the Middle East. People knew about him in the Arab countries too. He was asked to come to Turkey to design a bridge, if you can believe that, because he was also an architect. He was a painter, a sculptor, and an architect. That's what you call a multi-talented. The date, I'm going to give you a heads up that'll, again, hopefully be a stress-reducing fact for the test for all of you. Of course, they're right in front of you because they're open book. And that is the date can be rounded for any work of art that is on the test to the nearest 0. Okay. Oh, here we go. Sorry. Yeah. Welcome. We just started with this first slide. It's the first one on your syllabus. The Libyan Sibyl, right? Michelangelo, 1512. Okay. So if you were to have this slide on the midterm, you could just write 1510. But of course, the date's in front of you if you take out your notes, and you can always, in an open book test like that, it's not that big a deal. But in any case, we're going to give you the exact years if we know them. And in most of the earlier works, especially prehistoric and early ancient art, we don't know the exact year, but this we do. Okay, here's how you take your notes, all of the notes for the rest of this class for each of the slides that are on the syllabus to help you study later. And there are 2 categories all your notes should fit into. And I always start with the meaning. And I would just do that, put a subheading, you know, I don't know if you underline it, all caps, whatever, meaning. And underneath that, I will proceed in just a moment to tell you the facts about the meaning that you should know. You know, not everything, of course, but the main facts that in a few minutes you can write down. And that's the first of the 2 methods of analyzing a work of art. The other category for all your notes is formal analysis. That is another way of saying the artist's techniques. What techniques or methods did the artist use to create this work of art? So once again, the 2 categories are meaning. I always start with that. And then I go after that to the second category, which used to have a separate heading for your review purposes. And that's formal, you know, just 2 words, formal analysis, which is the composition elements of the design. All right, let's start with the meaning. All right, well, this is a fresco on the ceiling of, some of you know this, a church in Rome. Technically, it's not Rome, but I don't want to get to, unless you're Catholic, you wouldn't know this. It's actually in a place called the Vatican City, which is a city within a city. Okay, but just keep it simple. Say Rome, that's close enough. It's, I'll say it again, a fresco painted on the ceiling of a chapel in Rome. And each of those scenes, it's one scene from a series of 18 different panels. And all the panels are scenes from the Bible. So this is one of the 18 panels. But that leads us to our first definition. We're starting slow. Only 2 definitions for tonight. It's on your list of terms that you'd always have next to your laptop when we do the lectures. So we'll just do 2 tonight. But the first one, there it is, fresco, right? I always leave enough room to write the definitions. Most of them are only 1 or 2 lines. Some are longer, but this one is a short definition. You probably know this, some of you. The fresco is a painting on wet plaster. Literally, that's it. A painting on wet plaster. That's how Michelangelo created this. Now, if you didn't know this fact, you should write it. But I think many people, if they know anything about this place and these paintings, you know that Michelangelo painted them while lying on his back on scaffolding over 50 feet above the floor. He actually almost fell once. You'll have to write that. That's a sidebar. But he could have killed himself easily. That was more. I think it's like 60. Actually, it's 60 feet. Yeah, that's right. I was thinking 50, and then I looked it up. It's almost 60 feet. Of course, things aren't in feet. In Europe, they don't do things in feet and inches. So it's just say a nearly 60-foot height. Then he did that for 4 years. He laid on his back painting the ceiling of this chapel. Why? Because the Pope ordered him to. He did get paid, but not as much as he was promised, and late. So he was underpaid and he was paid late. Does that sound familiar? Anybody's an artist? My dad used to have that happen. It's not uncommon. The world's most famous artist, and he was, I don't want to say cheated, but undercompensated. So he did all this over 4 years for a Pope who insisted, who literally ordered him to finish this. And he walked off the job when he got sick once, and the Pope forced him, this is part of the meeting, the Pope brought soldiers to his house, not the Pope himself, but obviously he sent, I should say, soldiers, armed and, with swords and spears to his house, and forced him to come back to this part of Rome to finish the painting. This series, the painting, these 18 panels. Okay, that's maybe half the meeting. The other is what's going on here in this scene. This is a figure from the Bible called a sibyl. It's a type, just keep it simple, because there's so much complexity. I never want you to get overwhelmed. If I can avoid it, I will. So just keep it simple and say it's a type of angel. That's not technically correct, but that's good enough. It's a kind of angel that's mentioned in the Bible who can read the future to people down on earth. And that's just what she's doing. That is the book of prophecies. That is what will happen to people in the future down on earth. And whenever someone on earth asks a question to God, if God chooses, he'll tell that sibyl, tell them the answer. What kind of questions would it be? It wouldn't be, what are the winning lottery tickets next week? That you wouldn't get an answer to from this, angel or God. You would only get answers to life and death questions like, will my child survive this illness? Or will I die in battle tomorrow? Or will I be happy if I marry this person? That kind of life or death question you could ask. And if you were worthy, God thought you were worthy, the sibyl would answer your question. That's what she's doing. She's about to answer a question. And then the only other new term for tonight, so we'll get them both out of the way right away, and they're both very short, is what is this creature here? It's a cherub, a baby angel. So here's the definition. That's the second word down, and that'll be all our definitions for tonight. You see it there, right? Cherub. Some people pronounce it ch with a hard ch, cherub. It doesn't matter how you pronounce it, just the definition, it matters. By the way, cherub is a baby angel often found in Renaissance art. A baby angel often found in Renaissance art. That could be in sculpture, architecture, or painting. Well, Michelangelo put them in some of his sculpture and on a couple of his buildings and in many of his paintings. So that's a cherub. but there's a debate about what he's doing, and you don't have to write any of that. I mean, what is he doing? Is he looking at himself in the mirror? It almost looks like it's a reflection of himself. They had mirrors back then, but then I don't see a mirror. Oh, but it could be the marble. Marble's shiny, right? We don't know. It doesn't look like he's helping. He's supposed to be a helper, right? An assistant to the Sybil. He is not helping with the heavy lifting. She's doing it all. The last thing I'll say about the meaning is, look how accurate and lifelike her physique is. Her muscles, right? The tone of them, and her facial features, her hair. Does anybody know how Michelangelo learned how to paint the human body so accurately? He was the most accurate painter of human anatomy up until his time. Anybody know? It's controversial what he did. Nobody's heard this? As a student of art, he did something illegal to study the human body. Nobody remembers. Okay, then you want to write this. He dissected dead bodies, as in freshly dug graves of paupers, poor people, homeless, in other words, who nobody would object to. He didn't do it to be ghoulish or, some strange perverted, fascination. He did it to study the human body so that he could see how muscles attach to each other, how they attach to bones, how joints work. And that's how he learned how to both draw and paint the human body more accurately than anyone else of his generation or his era, his time. There was one other artist that did it, and you probably know this, Da Vinci. He did it too. And he did it earlier. He was 20-some years older than Michelangelo. But when he did it, he had permission. He was already pretty famous when he did it. And he didn't do it just for drawings. He did it to study anatomy and sciences. So you have to write into that. Just say Michelangelo was the first painter to specifically learn how to paint a human figure by dissecting cadavers. That's what they're called. Corpses, if you prefer. Same word. Okay, it's plenty on the meaning. On the test, you're not going to have to remember all that. Just a paragraph. I'll explain that when we get to the review session for the midterm. All right, let's switch now. Remember, the second heading for your notes should be 2 words, formal analysis, meaning the composition. So I'm putting the arrow somewhere where it is, you see there on her dress. Anybody notice something about the color of her dress compared to the wall and her undergarment there, or the book on the shelf? Anybody notice? Well, it's not obvious, and we're just starting, so I'll just tell you. Does
it have a highlight?
Yeah, it kind of. I mean, you're on the right track. You notice the color of her dress before you notice most of the other colors around her. Maybe second, you might notice the skin tones of these two, of course, European. They were models that posed. Well, I don't know about the sheriff. That might have been just Michelangelo's knowledge of, baby corpses. I should have said that. I don't think he dissected dead babies, but he did see, obviously a lot of human bodies after their passing in order to figure out how to do this. So the bottom line is this, okay? The first element of composition in your notes should be color. The fact that her dress is a bright orange and her skin is a warm, and that's the right word, pink color. And then both of them had kind of blondish hair, don't they, right? Obviously being Europeans. And so those colors are, the right word is not bright, but that's in the ballpark. The right word is warm tones, just like the word warm. Warm tones are colors that come from the earth. That's the other phrase for them, earth tones, that come from nature or from something in nature, fruits, vegetables, flowers, plants, what have you, the earth itself. Earth tones are called, but the right term for our purpose in this class is warm. The warm tones are what your eyes, whether you know it or not, subconsciously automatically notice those first. And so what are the opposite of warm colors? Well, you can guess, cool. Cool tones are the grays and the greens that surround these two figures, and also including her undergarments there. So we have warm colors on her dress, on their skin, and on that wooden box she's resting her rather giant toe. Look at that. That's the biggest toe in the history of painting. Anyway, so the point is that these are things that the artist, Michelangelo, wants you to notice first. He wants you to notice her dress and her upper body, the strong arms lifting that book, and the sidekick, the baby angel. He wants you to notice that first. So he uses warm colors on them. And your eyes, whether you know or not, subconsciously pick those colors up first. And then the cool colors are seen after warm colors. I'll show you next week. We're going to do the whole first half of class, an analysis of the 9 elements of composition, slowly and carefully, with my rather limited but adequate artwork as examples of each one. And I will make sure by the time we finish that, you will understand how to look for each of these elements. So this first one we're talking about in your note should be, the artist used warm colors or earth tones on the dress and the skin tones, and you could say the box, the wooden box, and cool colors on the background. All right, let's talk about one other element of composition. Well, how about we'll do 3 out of the 9 on each slide tonight. Some nights I'll do more than that, maybe even almost all of the 9. It depends on the timing, because after you learn how to do it, you can start to do it yourself, but it's still early. So let me just ask for, anybody here again, it's just, what do you see here about the way your body is posed? Isn't there something odd about it? Or not odd so much, just what would you describe her pose as? Anybody? The position of her body. Is it normally?
It's kind of awkward.
Yes, it is, because
I don't know.
Well,
it's bad for
the normal. Go ahead. Say again.
It's twisted up. It's
twisted. There you go. That's good. Yeah, well, you both got the idea. Yeah. Anyway, the point now you should add to your second set second element of composition, I meant, is that her body is posed in a twisted, or you could even say, if you want to say awkward, that's okay, but that isn't really the right word. I would say a twisted or turning, like she is in the middle of turning, moving. She's lifting a book, she turned away from us, and she's turning back, right? So she's in a position of her body is turning or twisted. And there's a word for that. It's called dynamic, just like that word you've all heard used for all kinds of other things. But in art, what does it mean to call something dynamic? It means any object in any visual work of art, painting, sculpture, architecture, drawing, photo, doesn't matter. Any visual work of art, if you see any part of it, any single object or group of objects in that work where there are 2 or more curved or diagonal lines. So the right way to say it is her body is curved. But twisted is okay, but curved is a more accurate way to say it. Actually, multiple curves. I mean, even her arms are curved upward here, right? They're not out flat, straight, or straight up or down by her side. So her whole body, her neck even, her head, is twisted or turned, but the right word is curved. The curved lines make her whole body dynamic. And the baby angel is too, because if the baby angel was sitting looking straight at us, with his arms down, assume it's, cherubs, I don't know if they have, a gender. It's been a while since I've been to I grew up Catholic, but it's a long time ago that I used to go to church. Anyway, the point is that his body is also slightly twisted or turned away from us. And therefore it's full of curves, his shoulders, his arms, right? And his head and neck. So both the cherub or baby angel and the 2 main figures of those and the Sibyl have a lot of curved lines. Therefore, they're both dynamic figures. And then we have the straight lines that create the opposite of dynamic is stable. So what is stable in this work of art? The borders of the wall, not the figures within them. Those have some curves, don't they? But just the edges of the framing of the wall. It's supposed to be marble, right? A marble niche in some building, right? So here we see straight lines and right angles. When you see straight lines and right angles, then that object in any work of art is stable, the opposite of dynamic. Don't worry if it doesn't all make sense right now, because we're starting out, slow, and we have plenty of time to get up to speed, but it'll make sense to you by the time we get through, certainly by the 3rd or 4th week, before you write your papers. Okay, Devin, Roy, you had a question? See, when you say raise your hand, I'm trying to figure out.
I have a question.
Please, go ahead.
Does dynamic in this sense always imply curves?
Okay, good question.
Or because dynamic to me, usually I think motion.
Yes, it implies, okay, good, very good point. It implies that object is in motion. For instance, in a battle scene, where people on horses, like you're going to see those, not that much in this class, but, if you study Renaissance art, or if you write a paper on, a battle scene or a group, of people in a scene, if they're moving, and their bodies are either twisted or curved, then they're by definition dynamic because the lines are curved, but it also implies motion. So the whole reason for something to be dynamic is, so you're on the right track there with what you're asking, is to imply motion. And that's obviously what's going on here. This woman is in the middle of a movement of her lifting the book, right? Do you have another question?
Yeah, I do have a question.
Go ahead, sure.
Or more of a observation, I guess. A lot of people said that the woman looks like she's in a sort of awkward position, maybe referring she's in a position of like, I guess not a power of strength, but just looking at it objectively. I mean, she looks pretty toned, and I'd almost say like she looks pretty masculine to me.
All right, good point. Actually, you touched on something I didn't think we have time to talk about. I'll keep it brief because we got to move on to the next slide, but it's a good point you brought up. Almost all the historians who have researched Michelangelo's career have come up with the conclusion that because of sexism at that time, women were not supposed to be models for art unless it was a portrait that was commissioned by that woman or her husband or father, family member. So they would be considered, isn't it ridiculous, little better than prostitutes if they would be paid to be posing. So yes, we think, many historians believe it was a man who posed for this. And then he had a woman he knew probably posed for the head and face. So you're onto something there. Yeah. Well, it could easily be the case. We don't know that, but that's one possible explanation. Okay.
I don't know exactly like the deal between like male and female models for paintings of the time. Just my base observation.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I tell you what, I'm going to finish up one last thing on this because I didn't want to quite leave yet, but yeah, we're going to pick up the pace here. But no, you're asking good questions or bringing up good points, everyone so far. Yeah, excellent. All right, so one more thing is the outline, and I'll just cut to the chase because we are starting to get a little behind. Look at the darker than normal lines for a painting I'm talking about around the outer edge of her body, especially her arms, but it's also true of her face. That's called bold, and also on the baby angel. Look, see where the arrows. That's called bold outline. Michelangelo invented that technique of using bold. So there's a third technique, line. Line can be used in so many ways we don't have time to go into tonight. We will next week, all the variations of how line can be used. It's not that many, it's like 3 or 4. But for now, we'll just stick to the one type of line used here, which is bold, 2 words, outline, around the outer edges. Michelangelo developed that technique. It's hard to say he invented it, but he's the first famous painter to use it. On all his main figures in all his paintings, he had bold outline. Why? Because it makes that figure stand out from the background more, and it makes it look more three-dimensional. I think you can see that if you have anybody here been to the Sistine Chapel, you don't ever forget that experience. Of course, now it would be dicey to go, but I think it's open again. You just have to have the vaccine pass. I think it is now. Anyway, when I went, it was in 2000, and it had just been restored, and it was so nice because it wasn't a private viewing, but I got to go when it wasn't yet open in the morning when it was still cool. There's no air conditioning. Rome in the summer is hot, so I got to enjoy it fairly leisurely. I mean, there was maybe, a third, if not less, a quarter of the normal people. It's usually so crowded you could barely turn around. But once you look up and see this, you'll never forget it. To think someone spent 4 years lying on their back to create these. Okay, let's move on now. This is the next must know, and it's on your syllabus, I believe. No, actually, I didn't put it on. Okay, let's go to the Laocoon group. Okay, this is good because it'll be one that actually might come up, has a much more likely possibility of coming up on the here. I'm going to skip ahead there. Whoops, I overdid it. Sorry. We're going to get to that. That'll be our next one, our third one. Okay, I reserve the right to move things around within each week's lecture just for variety's sake, and also because it just happens sometimes with the slide files. But this is in order here. You see number 2 on our list for tonight, Laocoon group. And I'll spell that L, of course, capital Laocoon, Laocoon group. The artist, we know who the sculptor was. He was a famous Greek sculptor. And that's Polydorus. That would be his last name, of course. Polydoros. Polydorus. first century BC. Now I'm using BC and AD. I understand some people feel that's old hat, and they have a point, except for the fact that if you travel around the world, you will see that 90% of the rest of the world still uses those letters. So you could, on your test, absolutely, or on your papers, or any other reference, and if you write something about one of the artists' life who lived, in ancient times or something, you can write BCE and CE. They're equally accurate because they both mean the same thing, before or after the, now we know, not accurate assumptive date of the birth of Jesus. We know now that he wasn't year zero. I mean, it's kind of silly, but that's why we have, some kind of common standards, that otherwise the world gets too fractured in terms of measuring things and taking dates and things that have common meaning. So you can use either, is what I'm saying in this class. I'm still using the more traditional because that's what most parts of the world do. So I'm saying BC. If you want to write BCE, that's fine. Okay, what are we looking at here? The meaning, again, always started with that. Well, it's a scene from the Trojan War, as in the war of the Greeks against the Trojans. And if you don't know about that, I don't have time to summarize it, but I'll just say that at the end of that war, the Greeks, some of you know this, even if you don't know the rest of the story of that war, the Greeks left a giant wooden horse. You've heard of that. Beware of Greeks bearing gifts, which is rather kind of discriminatory against people of Greek heritage. I have many friends from Greece. I've been there several times. Great country. Okay, so that phrase means what? The story is, and it's fairly well documented, that it actually happened. Now there's archaeological evidence to verify. They built a giant wooden horse, and they, of course, hid their soldiers inside it. But the Trojans foolishly took it as a gift, a gesture of surrender, when the Greek army looked like it was retreating on its boats to go back to Greece. And so what did they do? They took that horse inside. But before they took the horse inside their city gates, a man named Laocoon, that's him right there in the middle, with his two sons, who was a prophet, that means someone who can foresee the future, figured out what the trick the Greeks were trying to play on the Trojans. He figured it out, and he tried to warn the Trojans, don't accept that gift. But before he could do that, here's the main part of the meaning. The Greek gods, of course, they sided with the Greeks in that war. So according to the Greek version of the war, they punished this man, Laocoon, by killing him and his two sons. He sent, or the god Neptune, right? Well, the Greeks called him Poseidon. You can just say either Neptune, right? Actually, the same word as the planet, was one of the names, the two names for the Greek god of the sea. So just say the Greek sea god sent a giant sea serpent out of the sea to crush to death that man, Laocoon, and both his sons together, all three of them. And you might think it's just physical pain he's reacting to. Look at his face. It's emotional pain, knowing he caused the death of his own children by defying the Greek gods. That's the underlying message here. Don't defy the gods. The Greeks love to have those, morals in their myths, right? There is a good movie called Troy with, of all things, Brad Pitt, isn't it, in that? Actually, he's pretty good playing Achilles, and I forget who plays Hercules. I don't know. Anyway, it's a pretty good movie based on all the famous characters from that. And you're going to hear about that when I get to Greek art. But for now, just keep it simple. I'll recap. This is a scene from the end of the Trojan War when the Greeks had left a giant wooden horse, on the beach in front of the city walls. And just before the Trojans took it into their city, this man, Laocoon, who could foresee the future, tried to warn them. And instead of warning them, he was killed. He was crushed to death by a sea serpent sent by the Greek god of the seas to kill him and his two sons. That's pretty much the whole meaning, except for one more fact. This is a replica of the original because the original is gone. It's a Roman copy of the original. And so that's why we have a date here that I doubt many of you would know, but maybe a few of you do, that first century BC, the Greeks were totally under Roman control by that. The Roman Empire was already, huge by that time. The Greeks were a conquered province of Rome. So this is, in other words, to summarize the last fact now, one sentence about the meaning, and we'll go on to some formal analysis, that this scene I mean, not this scene. I'm sorry. This sculpture, I apologize. This sculpture was created as a copy from the original Greek when it was still around. And that there, since then, the original Greek Polydorus, original model for this, the original version, is long gone. It's been lost, centuries ago. But this is a Roman copy. And if you care to know where it is, it's in the Vatican. That's that place where the Pope lives inside the city of Rome. You don't have to write that back because that's a sidebar. But that's where you can see it. It's in the Vatican. And it is over 2,000 years old, but the original was 2,500 years old. Hundreds of years older, back when the Greeks were the most powerful country in the Mediterranean and the Romans were in a little village off on the Italian peninsula. They weren't yet anything powerful. So when the original was made, the Greeks were the most powerful culture in the ancient world at that time. And then that original piece was lost somehow or destroyed. And this is a Roman copy. Okay, plenty on the meaning. Now, I bet you already, some of you know that this is dynamic, right? If you remember the definition of dynamic, there's no straight lines in it except for the base. So the only part of this work that is stable is the bottom. Everything else is curved lines, isn't it? But what about the face? Let's get up close. You notice something about the hair and the muscles. Does that look fairly detailed, even realistic or true to life? Some sculptors obviously modern sculpture is not realistic. It's not meant to convey reality, but this obviously is meant to convey the impression of 3 human bodies, right? With all their muscles and hair and facial features. Okay, well, it's getting late, so I'll just cut to the chase. That is called simulated texture. That's with that S-I, not S-T, not stimulated, but simulated texture. And what that means is the artist, in this case, used a chisel to carve. So he used carved lines to create the impression or simulation of hair and skin, right? And muscles and this snake's face. Look at that. That's a rather mean looking sea serpent. It's supposed to be a sea serpent, right? And what little bit of clothing they aren't wearing, right? Their robes or what's left of the robes around their shoulders. Those all have simulated textures. Because what is the real texture? It's marble. It's a smooth stone. And that wouldn't tell us a thing. Obviously what the sculptors all did during the ancient times, all the way through, even as recently as this century, early 20th, first century, you'll still see people making realistic marble figures, right? Out of carved stone. That's what marble is. When it's a sculpture, it means the artist was using, if it's a realistic image, as it is here, of 3 human bodies and a sea serpent and some robes, all of the simulated textures, the hair, the skin, the clothing, are created by carved lines. So there's another kind of line. So there's 2 of the elements right there. Plus, we already said that the whole thing is dynamic. Now, the color here is cool white. But white by itself, if it was just white against a white background or very light background where you couldn't see any other kind of color, it would be neutral. I will explain that next week in more detail. It'll be clear by the time we finish next week's lecture. For now, just say that there's no warm colors here. So because it's kind of a coolish gray off-white, you could say, or grayish white, those are not earth tones. Those are cool colors. Okay. How are we doing on the time here? Yeah, we need to move on. Okay. Next, must know here. And it is a Van Gogh. So we're going to spend a little more time on this about him. Even though he's not really part of this main topics we cover, nonetheless, he's so important. Many of you will want to write papers about him or extra credit, projects. Wheat field, the title of this painting is Wheat, 2 words, field, and cypress trees, plural. Cypress, of course, is C-Y-P-R-E-S-S. The artist's name is Van Gogh. Of course, you probably know how to spell his name, but in case you haven't seen it in a while, it's 2 words. Capital V-A-N, then capital G-O-G-H. And the date is 1888. Okay, so let's start with the meaning, of course, as I always will. I think a lot of you know these facts. If you don't, you probably should go ahead and write some of these things about who he was. All right, he was not, here's some of the myths that you should know are not accurate, that you hear repeated, even in some documentaries and things. Not in textbooks, I don't think. He was not an impressionist. This isn't an impressionist painting. It's another style. He invented his own style. So how do we label his style? There's only one way. He never said this, but all the art historians and art collectors and, experts since he died have called it the Van Gogh style. There's just no other way to describe that because he invented several new techniques. So he is a post-impressionist because he came after the Impressionist era. Well, actually, that's not totally correct. His first few years, he was dabbling, like 2 years. As a student of art, he tried his hand at Impressionism, but it didn't suit him. Pure Impressionism is a whole different thing. We won't go into it because it's not a scope within the scope of this class, but some of you will be writing papers about it. So you can obviously do your own checking on what makes something Impressionist. This is not Impressionist. It is post-Impressionist. But more specifically, it's in the style. He invented his own style of painting called Van Gogh style. Well, how do we recognize that style? There are 3 features that go with that. And I'm going to do those when we get to the formal analysis because those are techniques. So we should continue on the meaning part of your notes with something, things, view, facts about him. I think most people have heard that he cut his ear off. And then they might have also read or heard that he gave it to a prostitute. Neither is correct, but they're based on some facts. So here are the facts. He lived with another painter at the time of that incident. He did injure himself, but this is what actually happened. He lived with another painter. I think some of you heard of him, Gogh. I'll spell it for you, but you won't have to write his name on the test if you don't want to. But if you want it in your notes, it's Gauguin. Gogh was another post-impressionist painter. They both had dabbled in impressionism but didn't like it and moved on to their own styles. Gogh had his own style too. So he lived with Gogh for a while because his brother suggested that. That is Van Gogh's brother. Van Gogh's brother was an art dealer who's the first and only person during Van Gogh's life to ever believe in his art. No one else did. He didn't sell any of his paintings till the month he died. He sold one painting for $50. That's kind of sad, isn't it? Within a few months after he died, they started selling for thousands of dollars, even in the 1800s. So sadly, he never saw the success he deserved. You all know that probably. But what did happen was he had a few months of living with a much more egotistical, rather rude man named Gogh. And Gogh constantly criticized Van Gogh's painting. What he painted, his styles, techniques. Finally, Van Gogh got mad enough about it. After all, who was paying Gauguin's rent? Van Gogh's brother was paying the rent and food money for both of them. He'd already been doing that for his brother because, like I said, his brother couldn't make any money. But Gogh had been selling paintings. So to convince Gogh to go live with Vincent, he said, if you go down there, I'll pay, as long as you stay there, I'll pay for, he needs some company and a fellow artist, right? Bad choice because Gogh was relentlessly sarcastic and verbally cruel. Finally, this is what actually happened with the self-injury. They had an argument one night over Van Gogh's painting, and Van Gogh just got so angry that he literally threatened, but he didn't actually harm Gogh with a razor. And Gogh left the apartment. And while Gogh was out for the night, going to a whorehouse, of course, that's well documented. Nearby, Van Gogh lopped his earlobe off in a fit of self-anger because he'd let himself be abused emotionally and verbally for months by this other more successful painter. Yeah, that's the truth. And then days later, the shriveled remnants of that, he kept it, I know it's weird, in a box of just the earlobe after he'd been bandaged, the bleeding had stopped. And he decided he had, that is Van Gogh, to commit himself voluntarily to an asylum, they called it, insane asylum, of course, somewhere he could hopefully get treated for his manic depression. That's what he suffered from. Bipolar is the other word for it. So you could write it either way, bipolar or manic depression. He was in one of those fits, obviously, at the time he hurt himself. he decided that he would send that to the place where he had spent some time with Gogh, which was a whorehouse, but he didn't cut it off for a prostitute or hand it to her or give it to her. It was sent to that house of ill repute, that whorehouse is the word at the time, right? He sent it there just in a way as a kind of parting gesture as he left to go to this asylum. So those are the facts. Those are the well-documented facts. The only other thing I'll say about his death, and I'll keep it brief because you don't want to spend too much time on the personal angle of the meaning, then we'll segue to how we recognize Van Gogh's style. What are the elements that distinguish his style in just a moment. But when he died, he lingered for 2 days, and he did say that he had shot himself accidentally or not. He never said which way. Was it an accident? He didn't own a gun, and there's some village bullies that harassed him for weeks in the town. After he got out of the asylum, he lived a few more months before he died of a gunshot wound. No one knows what really happened, but there's evidence that those bullies, that was their father, one of them, their father's gun. That much has been proven. It could have been Van Gogh stole it or got it somehow and then accidentally or deliberately shot himself. But there's just as much evidence that one of those kids, perhaps just playing around, trying to harass or threaten him, maybe deliberately, shot Van Gogh, and Van Gogh decided, well, it's time to go anyway. I know that sounds flippant, but that's actually the concept in this book, which is called Van Gogh, A Life. Original title. It was published just about 5 years ago, and you can find it. It's around. I'm sure it's on Amazon Kindle. It's a really powerful book, well written, more thoroughly researched than any. And those two authors, or two of them, believe that he was shot, probably accidentally, but maybe deliberately, by one or both of the teenage boys. And Van Gogh just decided not to implicate them and just go ahead and accept that this is God's way of telling. He was very religious, Van Gogh. God's way of telling was time to leave. He hadn't had any success or happiness, none in his life, except a few moments here and there with, his brother and his sister-in-law and his baby niece. He did at least get to visit his brother and his brother's family. And those are the only moments of happiness he knew in his adult life. Okay, now switching to formal analysis. What are the elements of design that mark this as Van Gogh's style? Well, there are three. The dynamic quality, and it's the phrase they use, historians all use, and I've always thought even before I started teaching this class, is undulating motion of all the objects. Everything is in motion. Look at the clouds in the sky. Look at these cypress trees and the way they twist and turn as they rise up toward the sky. Look at the trees and bushes around the cypresses. Look at the wheat field. I can hear the wind, I meant to say, sorry, the wind rustling through that wheat on a windy day. And even the mountains have an undulating effect. Well, by definition, that makes them dynamic. But his way of showing the dynamic quality of all things, he believed there was a spirit, just like Native Americans did, in everything, alive, so-called, or dead. Inanimate object, he believed there was a presence, a higher power in everything, which is rather unusual for raised as a Christian. His father was a Christian minister. Very unusual for Van Gogh to believe like that, but he did. So he illustrated his belief in spiritual presence by making all the objects in his paintings, even the clouds, have an undulating motion, which of course makes them dynamic. I don't think there's any of his paintings that are stable. Maybe a couple, but not many. Okay, the second thing is that he would use bold outline around the main objects. And you see it even in the bushes, right? Look at these bushes, even here, right? You don't see it on cypress trees because they're too dark, but you see it on these trees, right? And that wouldn't work on the wheat, but anywhere that it's possible to have an outline, he used bold outline around the main objects, or just say, many of the objects in his paintings. And then the third thing is the most important, and then we'll wrap this up, this slide, the notes with this last fact. His color theory is very specific, and there's only one way to write it. If you were going to write a paper about Van Gogh's paintings for your 100 points for either of your two papers, you'd want to mention this. You don't have to get an A, but it's a good, easy way to analyze any of his landscapes. Not so exactly for his portraits, but even in his portraits, there's some of this. His landscapes, which is 80 or 90% of his paintings were landscapes, he believed that colors were symbolic of different human states. Warm colors, especially yellow, gold, and shades of yellow and gold, like the wheat, are symbolic of the happy human emotions, such as happiness, joy, love, acceptance, things he had very little of in his life. So you see that on the wheat here. Those are warm colors, and they symbolize the happier human emotions. Green is the opposite, and shades of green, light or dark, is symbolic of the negative human emotions like anger, greed, envy, hate, violence, things he did experience. I just told you he had a nearly attacked Gogh, right? I don't blame him, frankly. I mean, we know about Gogh and how he mistreated everyone in his life. But nonetheless, that would have been bad, right, for him to actually attack someone. So he felt anger, he felt violence within himself, and sometimes he expressed it in some of his paintings. And this painting, I can't remember if it was done before or after that incident. I think it's before. Yeah. But anyway, he felt like most people do occasionally, anger and violence. And he didn't like those emotions, but he would portray them through these colors in his landscapes. And then finally, the third part of his color theory is blue, and shades of blue are symbolic of the presence of a divine power. Like I said, he was a pantheist. I didn't use that word. You don't have to write that. Some of you know what I mean. That's what many of the quote founding unquote fathers of the Revolutionary War were like that. Jefferson, they didn't believe in Christianity, traditional religion. They believed there's powers out there. Maybe some of them got the ideas from the Native American cultures around them at that time that were still viable at that time. They had their own governments, the Iroquois and things were still present on the East Coast. So just say that the blue colors of blue that you see on the mountains and in the sky, especially around the clouds here, symbolize the presence. You can say God if you want. He used that word occasionally, Van Gogh did, but he usually would say of the divine or a divine power or presence in the universe, which, as I said, he was very religious in that broad sense of the word. So that shows up in every one of his landscapes practically. Okay, it's plenty on the meaning. But one more thing, balance. Is this balanced? That's another element that we haven't talked about, and we'll get to all 9 of them next week. Well, yes, it is, because the area of the sky and the area of the land are equal if you measure them. He was brilliant. He didn't use tools or instruments to measure things. He just did it in his head. He wanted a sense of, the sky above, the land below, the, ephemeral. The sky, of course, is in motion, and, it's gases and, empty. It seems like it's empty space, but it isn't. Clouds, of course, are matter. They're mass. They have, of course, mass and volume to them. Of course, they're floating globs of water in the sky, right? So he knew that, and he wanted to convey that, but he wanted that area of the painting, the sky, the clouds, and all the things above us, to have an equal area or space on out of the total of the area of the whole painting. So it is roughly balanced, top to bottom, but it's unbalanced toward the right, because there's more heaviness here. The weight of this, right? These 2 cypress trees and the uphill, right, angles of the mountains. As you look towards the far right side of the painting, there's more weight on that side. That would make it unbalanced to the right, but balanced top to bottom. And we'll cover all this in more detail next week. Okay, we have time for our last one, and it's not an important one. It's an architecture slide. We're doing okay on the time, actually, quite well. We'll stay in maybe about 9:22 or so, something like that. Okay, here's the last slide to take notes on for tonight. Guggenheim Museum. That's Guggenheim. Of course, capital G. Guggenheim. It's a billionaire family of art collectors. Basically what they were, who paid for this museum. Well, part of it. And the word museum you can all spell, right? So 2 words, Guggenheim Museum. The artist's name, well, you don't have to write Frank Lloyd. His last name's enough. You only need to know the last names of the artists in this class. Wright. Of course, it's Wright, 1959. So let's start with the fact that this is a museum of, not the museum, be careful, don't write that. There's another museum called the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Totally different building, totally different period, different style, different architect. So this is one of many, a Museum of Modern Art in New York City, in the middle of the wealthiest neighborhood on Manhattan. I think everybody knows what that means, Manhattan, right? The heart of New York is the island, Manhattan. So it's in the middle of the wealthiest, and it has part to do with the meaning. I'll get to why in just a moment. But there's another fact about it that is easy, quick, one sentence note to add to your notes. It's the last building Wright ever designed that he got to see completed during his life. He died like 2 weeks after, just say shortly after this building was completed. He just lived long enough to see it completed. So it is the last building completed during his lifetime. Now, quick aside, because some of you may choose to go to the Marin County Courthouse to get extra credit, right? Take photos. That's also dated 1959. It wasn't even begun till after Wright died. So the design was that year, but he never saw that building completed. It wasn't finished until 62. So once again, this is the last completed design during Frank Lloyd Wright's lifetime. Okay, but what style is it? Well, he called it organic, meaning having to do with living things or nature. That's his word for his own style, the latter part of his career. He had several phases. Of course, he was a genius, and his styles varied and, of course, evolved. But this is his last phase of his career. He would say the last 30 years of his career. He lived to be 90-some years old, still designing up to the day he died. So this is what he called his later period. He called organic, just like it sounds, to be organic. How does that fit with the building made out of concrete, glass, and steel? Oh, here's how, he said. What does this look like? Anybody want to, last little opportunity to, do a raised hand or chat or otherwise speak up. Does this look like a kind of possibly living creature that you might see after a rainstorm when you took a walk across the street? You're in Central Park. That's where this is, right across the street from Central Park, the biggest park in any urban city, big city in the United States. What might you see that you might even occasionally step on, after a rainstorm in a park? Anybody think what that could be? What kind of creature could that be?
Worms?
I guess like a snail.
Snail. Yes, snail. He has said when the critics looked at this and they didn't like it, they didn't see the building took 10 years to get permitted, or just say many years. I don't know if it was 10. It was in the ballpark of that. He designed it in 1942. You don't have to know that. Just the year it was completed. The point is it took many years to get the permits. Why? Because the neighbors were rich and powerful and they hated what they saw when they saw his design. They saw his model. Architects always make models. So they got to go down to City Hall and see the plans and the model, and they got to speak up just like in every public hearing. And most of the people in that neighborhood didn't want this building in that neighborhood. And you can guess the irony. Some of you, if you've ever been to New York or seen any TV shows set in New York, like Mr. Popper's Penguins and other movies that were filmed at this museum, at least one or more scenes, or The International with Clive Owen and Naomi Watts. That's a great movie. There's a shootout in this. They had to rebuild the whole museum. There's no way the museum would allow them to shoot this building. It's a World Heritage Landmark. It's that unique. It started a trend. Lots of museums do what this did. So what's so unique about it? He said two things. One is the design and the style, which how did he justify this as organic based on living things? He said it's like a giant concrete snail. There's the shell. Here's the body connecting the head. Right. You can see that if you look, but of course, some people think he made that up after the fact to deflect criticism. Who knows? And I guess it's pretty sad. He was inspired by the snails that one sees on a walk in Central Park almost every time you go through that park. And then the other thing about it that is such a unique quality is this ramp. It is an inverted child's top. I don't know if any of you ever had toy tops? Probably not anymore. When I was growing up, that was a big deal. Yo-yos and tops were fancy things for you to get from your parents for your birthday. Yeah. So this is like an inverted top, or you can just say spiral, keep it simple. 6 stories of a spiral that widens as it goes up. So you can say upside down spiral if you want, or a spiral that opens up toward the top and it ends up with a skylight. It's so common to see that. Nobody now would think twice. If you go inside a building with a skylight and a round interior with ramps open to this all the way to the top. Oh, well, I've seen a lot of those. Yeah, after he designed this building set a new trend, in other words, for museums, hotels, commercial buildings, this kind of open atrium, round atrium with a spiral or otherwise curved ramp and a skylight at the top. So he invented garages and carports and indirect heating, you know, under the floor. All good. He was obviously a genius, yeah. An egomaniac and nasty to everyone in his life, except his last wife, his fourth wife. So Frank Lloyd Wright's reputation, here's the last fact about the meeting, won out against the neighborhood who objected, the people in that neighborhood, the rich and powerful neighbors who didn't want this building. And here's the irony, the last fact about the meeting. He was so famous, he's the world's most famous architect, not just America's most famous, but so yes, his reputation and the influence he had won out because the city government just overlooked the objections and said, we want the building. It's being paid for by a billionaire family anyway, the Guggenheims, that's why it's called after them. So it's not costing the taxpayers anything, except, well, it did kind of, you know, they had to do the infrastructure for the foundation. But the structure itself was, so they said, we're going to go ahead and build it. And now everyone, I know people that live in that neighborhood. I've been to this museum like 4 times when I've been in New York. I always go there. Oh, I'm, you know, how proud are they now? Oh, I live 2 blocks from the Guggenheim. Meet me there. You know, now nobody in that neighborhood would dream of objecting. They're proud to have this building as a neighbor. When their predecessors, or even some of them, when they were younger and that are still alive, vehemently opposed it. But Wright won out in the end. Okay, plenty on the meaning. Is this dynamic? Oh, absolutely. There's hardly anything stable about it, because diagonal lines are also dynamic. I didn't have a chance to mention that because there weren't any in the last few slides. Diagonal and curved lines both are dynamic. So even this, sort of like the utility shaft is what they call it, you know, like a giant smoke stack or ventilation shaft, which is, you know, all for the heating and the plumbing and stuff inside. Even that, and these 2 gift shops, they're both round, so they're dynamic. Even the balcony that you can take your food out and look out over this park. It's really a beautiful site here. The ramps here, the balconies on both, there's hardly any straight lines anywhere in it. I don't see any. So it's totally dynamic. And then what is the largest part of a building is called the mass, or of any work of art, not just buildings. The largest section in a building, it would be the part of that building. The largest mass is these are the art galleries. So the ramps, you could say, or gallery section is the largest mass. The second largest mass is the first 2 floors. This is where all the offices are, you know, the first 2 floors. Of course, there's no exhibits there. And then the third largest masses in that order are the 2 round rooms, 1 gift shop and 1 cafe. I think it's cafes up above. And then there is the texture of the materials. It's concrete, glass, and steel. I mentioned a moment ago, so if you didn't write that, you should now. Those are real textures, and they're smooth. So this building has no simulated textures. Most architecture, certainly modern architecture, doesn't imitate. Some Victorian houses and things, other buildings from that time, did simulate different materials than the actual material. But here it's all the real textures, real smooth concrete, real smooth glass, and real smooth metal for the framing. So those are all real textures. And then finally, architecture is all about space. That's the definition of architecture. You don't have to know this. It's not on the list of terms. Definition of architecture, 2 words: enclosed space. That defines every type of architecture, from teepees and igloos, or the earliest form of indigenous architecture, like the Miwoks had. I'll show you what their living quarters look like. All the way to the biggest modern high-rise or tallest skyscraper in the world. They all have in common that they are enclosed space. So this is what you write about in a building. The most important element is that space. So this is divided into, how would you define it? 3 major spaces, the interior. The largest space, and if you can find it and you're writing a paper, you'd want to know the height. I don't know the exact height, but I could guess from the floor to the top of the skylight or the ceiling. You can just say the largest space in this building of the 3 main sections is the ramp section, or it's actually the gallery area. Then the second largest would be the first 2 floors, as we just discussed, where all the offices are inside. You don't have windows, you know. And then the third largest masses are about equal, each of them the same size, or the 2 round areas where the office, I shouldn't say office, I'm sorry, I meant where the gift shop and cafe are located. So you don't have to get too detailed, and you certainly don't have to break down the dimensions of every part of a building. But if you're writing about architecture, and you will on the midterm and the final, you could, it's up to you to choose to define the space in relative comparative terms. Like, what is the largest section of that building? and how is it divided? Are there other rooms? Well, yeah, there's a bunch of smaller offices on the first 2 floors. You wouldn't have to say more than that, but you can describe in a general way the division of the main spaces inside. Okay, we've covered a lot tonight. I'm going to stick around if you have questions. Anybody about anything we've covered, or if you, by the way, if anybody missed the first part of this, it will be posted, the whole lecture for tonight, by 7 p.m. on Friday. Just to be safe, wait till like 8, because sometimes it takes a while, for them to process, right? Because I have to process 3 separate lectures each week, so that could take a while. So let's say, by 8 you can check. I post them certainly by 7, because I need to move on with my family on Friday nights after 7. But just to be safe, check, either later, like 8 or later on Friday, or anytime on the weekend, and you'll see these each of these lectures that you can then just replay each week, right? Okay, I don't think at this point there's anything. Oh yes, next week you will get another handout that'll be a PDF. I will send it to you early on, probably even Sunday night, for you to download. In fact, sooner than that if I can, maybe by Friday, but before the next class, before Monday. It'll be a 1-page handout called Elements of Composition, the 9 elements of composition. Have that printed out and next to you when we start the class next week, because I will have a whiteboard, you know what that is, hanging from the wall of my bedroom here, with all those 9 elements illustrated to various degrees, and I'll go over them each carefully, slowly, thoroughly, and you can ask questions. So the goal is that by the end of the second lecture, you have a pretty good idea of how to recognize those elements, because you will need to do that if you want an A on your papers about whatever work of art you write. And I'll explain how to write that when we get to the third week, and we will talk about the requirements for the paper. There'll be a separate handout for that too. Okay, we covered a lot, and you guys have been quite helpful and contributed some good comments and questions. And you also showed, I have to say, patience and persistence. I appreciate it, and I don't think you'll have to deal with any delays in logging on next week, okay, or from now on. Anybody have any questions? That's what we're here for. Anything about what we've talked about, from the, extra credit or grading system to any of the slides?
Yeah, I actually had a quick question.
Sure.
So we're going over some of these slides. Are there going to be slides that you want us to do by ourselves? Or are you going to be doing
No, it's all from the lectures. Yeah, just what you see in the class. And of course, if you miss one, you can watch them. Yeah, no, that's an important point. And the notes you get from the lectures will be almost enough by themselves to get an A. Well, it will be, depending on how thorough your notes are, but they parallel what's in the textbook. So I'm going to give you guys an inside tip. I didn't used to say this until toward the end of the semester, but why hide this fact? You do need the textbook for overview before each lecture to get context. It really is helpful for that. A, and B, almost all the images, like 85% of them, are from the textbook. I don't mean the slides came from there. I got them myself, right, from different sources. Or some of them were actually from the textbook publisher. But that point is that you can just, if you take very thorough notes the way I've been telling you tonight for each slide in each lecture, that's all you'll need to study for the 2 tests. And you can use the book to create flashcards or just as a visual aid to review from. I mean, I'm just giving you this is really early on to give you tips about the test. It's the 9th week before the midterm. So you've got plenty of time, and we will review. So I'm just saying the textbook is more like a companion to the lectures, but the lectures are what is important. So no, you don't have to worry about images that aren't covered in class. And we'll cut those down, like I said, about 40% before the tests. Okay? Important questions here. Okay, any other questions? Stick around as long as anyone has a question. And of course, you can email me or use my voicemail system to ask questions at any time between classes. All right, let's.
I actually had a quick question.
Sure,
just,
go ahead.
One to recap on what you said earlier. So you said that you were recording this and posting this onto YouTube, was it? Like the lecture?
Yeah, YouTube. I have my own channel.
Okay.
And it's Mark. You know what? I'm gonna mention that in an email. It's Mark A. Wilson's SRJC Art History Lectures. I'll send you that. I'm not good at sending links, and I don't even know if there's a way to do it on my antiquated computer's laptop. This is only 5 years old. My mainframe, a Dell from 2012. I know I can't do it on that, but you will be able to find them easily when you go on. If you just, and then once you do that, it's called channel, right? My quote unquote, my as in me, the one I created, will have all the videos from then on. So once you've done it once, it'll be easy to find the next set of lectures, whichever ones you want, you know, for reviewing for the test or catch up something that you missed, you know, if you didn't get the whole lecture or you missed that week. Yeah, I'm going to say 8 p.m. Friday. To be safe, I'll say 8 because, yeah, it takes a while. I have 3 lectures a week and all of them have to be separately down. You know what I mean? It takes a while.
Yeah, I think I found it. If you want, I can link it to the chat.
Oh, okay. Yeah. All right. I might be able to do something if you send it to me in to my AOL mail, and if it is transferable, I just don't know if it is. I apologize for that one area of weakness. Well, more than one, but that one. I meant to try and study. Oh, it's hard to explain. This summer, I didn't have a free moment. I didn't teach, but I had no free time for reasons I don't need to go into. And then suddenly I looked at the calendar. I said, oh my God, it's 2 weeks for the first class. I better pivot to that. So my point is that I don't really have facility around, there we go, with the task of always embedding links. In fact, I have an op-ed piece about police defunding. It's a controversial issue. And if it comes out, and it might, in the Santa Rosa Press Democrat, another option for extra credit. It's a little different point of view than you're used to hearing, I think, from the mainstream critics, and just some food for thought based on research that I cited the sources for. But the editor said, oh, I needed to be live links. Every one of them I put in, I finally learned how to do it for just the newspapers. They all went dead before the editor of the Santa Rosa paper could read them. Why? Because those papers don't want you to go to the live link for free. They want you to subscribe first. You know what I mean? So I just gave up on trying to figure out how to embed links in my emails. But if you send me, thank you, at least for trying, and it might work, a link to that might work for me to forward it in an email, which I will be doing. It'll be tomorrow when I get to it, about looking up these lectures on YouTube.
Yeah, I linked it in the chat right now. So if people just click on that link, it'll send them straight to your YouTube channel page.
Oh, okay. Well, for this class, that's good. You've been very helpful, and that's more than enough. But is it? Maybe I should just ask a way you could send it to my AOL so that I could then incorporate that as a live link to. It's not easy, is it? It doesn't always.
You want? I'll reply to one of your emails you sent me.
I will give you 5 points extra credit if I can do it in a way. Awesome. Yeah, if I can do it in a way that is usable for all my classes. You know.
All right. Yeah. Let me email you the link, and then.
It would be as an attachment, I think, or you tell me, and you can do it tonight or tomorrow. I won't go. I'm burned out now. I've been on my Zoom thing for like 6 hours. So after we finish tonight, I'm not going to go back on my computer till tomorrow, but I will check tomorrow and see if there's something you could tell me if you think it would work. And if it does, I will give you 5 points extra credit.
All right, for sure. I'll
yeah, sure. That's helping all your fellow students. And so it's worth some extra credit there. All right.
Yes. I have one last really quick
please.
question. I don't know if you can see my screen, but this is the book that I got for the Critic Sees by Sarah Gill.
Oh,
I just wanted to make sure that this is the correct volume for your class. Because I went online and I saw it went through one bit. Should be Mike.
Okay, I'm looking. I see Ohio State, Devin Rue, Daniel Perez, and Tristan Cabrera. If you're not one of those, then I think I can go up here and get gallery view. Hang on, right?
You're looking for Mike Windrick.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. There's quite a few. I'm going down the list here.
That's the book I ordered. I hope that's it.
Oh yeah, that's it. That's it.
Okay, cool.
Just you help your fellow students in a quick, easy way because it is toward the end of the evening, but I'm not going to sign off until the last question's answered. Do you know where did you get that and how much was it? Because
this is Amazon, and I think I got it used for $59.82.
That's still $20 less than the publisher. Yeah, I'm negotiating with that same publisher, Kendall Hunt, for a book on women architects, and they're telling me, oh, an ebook only for $80, and I know that's something that most students want to have to deal with, but that's a better price than everyone hear that? So you can try Amazon for used copies. And they should be no more than that. And you might luck out and get some for less if they're more beat up. I've heard they're as low as 40, but I've never heard a student confirm that in my classes. somewhere in the range of 40 to 60 for used copies, but that's better than 80, right? Yeah, that's the right book. Okay, any other questions? I really appreciate your participation and input and helpful suggestions. And,
yeah, I have a quick question.
Oh yeah, sure.
And it's about the this little self bio that you had us answer the 3 questions. When do you want that due?
By Friday would be good.
Okay.
Sooner if you can, the sooner you get it done, it's off your plate. I would use it both to acquaint myself better with everyone's background and more importantly, even more immediately, as a way of checking you in as being fully enrolled in the class. So it is important. I will repeat that and put an email out to everybody tomorrow. I might wait till Thursday because that's after my 2 Wednesday classes. But anyway, before the end of this week as a reminder. But to answer your question, sooner the better. Friday would be good, or sooner if you can.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else with any other questions?
Yeah, I had a quick question. It's more of a personal question. I have a receipt for the book I bought, which was the 6th edition, but the bookstore sent me the 5th edition. So I was wondering if that's universal or should I get
Yeah. What year is it, if you don't mind? Because that could apply to a lot of students.
Let me look.
It should be okay because I was used to say any edition after 2004. But actually 06 or 08 would be kind of more relevant because they did change them a little bit. It's typical.
Yeah, I'm trying to find it.
They do this a lot. They just change a few images and maybe a little bit of text, and then they call it a new edition and charge another 20-30% more.
Yeah,
I want to say a scam.
I'm looking for it right now. I can't find it, but I'll
the year it's in the front. Yeah, just open
Is it?
to the front. Oh, always. Yeah. Well, it's American technique. British books don't put their date. Isn't that weird? But they have copyright law, just like we do. It's an international law, but we have federal law too, which requires in American books that are copyrighted, published with a Library of Congress IBS number. You'll see it somewhere near the bottom on the page, usually on the flip side of the title page, where the title of the author, in large print is. Look at the back side of that page. It should be somewhere on that page, middle or the bottom of the page.
Yeah, that's where I looked, and I was.
Well, I've never heard of a textbook that didn't. Yeah, it always has to give you.
Oh, perfect. Oh, I'm blind. Okay, it's 2008.
Perfect. Yeah, anything from 06 on, but 08 is even better.
I got a tip I could share. I just discovered while looking at a website called campusbooks.com. It kind of compiles different vendors, and I actually found the Critic C's for $38.38 used.
Okay, there we are in the ballpark of between 40 and 60. So, all right. You know what? If you send me that information and maybe a link, like I just said to the other person about the, my channel, and assuming it works, so that I could tell people that, there's 5 points extra credit.
I'll take it.
Because you're helping a lot of other fellow students.
Right on.
Okay.
All right.
Well, this was a very productive session despite the slightly awkward start, but it won't be happening again. And even if they give me something with 8 6s, I'm going to carefully count every one and triple check before I forward the invitations to everybody. Okay, that's it. We're at 9:32, but if there's an urgent question, I can still answer. Anybody? Nope. All right, because you can.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for all of your interest in participation. See you all next week. Okay. If you want to come to my class and you missed the first part on Wednesday at 7:08, I will be giving the same lecture in person with masks on, in case you choose to do that. I don't mind students visiting from other classes. That's been my policy for you.
Professor, I have a last question. Sorry.
All right, one more.
I joined the class last night, and so in the Canvas, I don't have your class yet.
No, I'm not on Canvas. I said that.
Oh, okay.
Email. Did you see my email?
No, I just joined the class yesterday.
I see. No, it's too cumbersome. I just have my email. I'll tell you what. You should have the attachments that I've been referring to, but tonight, the syllabus, the course policies, the term.
Okay, I'll check. If not, I'll let you know.
If you don't, just email me tomorrow. Give me a little while till the end of the day, and I can forward them to you. Okay.
Okay.
It's a reasonable question. I understand if you join.
Yeah. Good night. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay. All right. See you guys.
I just stayed here to tell you that I already sent you the email and I sent
Okay.
a step by
I'll
step
see you tomorrow then. I hope.
instruction.
Yeah, and then I'll
Yeah.
let you know if it works. I will tell you also that I gave you that extra 5 points, extra credit.
Nah, that's all right. We can worry about it when we get to that bridge,
Okay.
sir.
Right.
But thank you very much and have a good one.
Yeah, you too.